Hello and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer and right now, in person, I am joined by my close associate Shaughan McGuigan.
Hello there.
And you know what happens when the Martin McGuinness and Reverend Ian Paisley of the Terrace get together. That is right. Shaughan and I might have no respect for one another's beliefs or our sincerely held positions. We might vehemently dislike one another at a cellular level, but for the good of the wider community, we are coming together to broker a lower league Scottish football equivalent of the Good Friday Agreement with the podcast that we have been waiting for all summer.
I'm not sure that's true. I mean, maybe you dislike me at a cellular level, but I can assure you that is not reciprocated. I think you're okay.
Okay, that's good. I mean, it becomes more and more difficult to come up with names. I came up for one that I thought was very funny, and I thought you definitely can't use that. I'll tell you about it after. You'll find it hilarious, but it is deeply offensive. That's right. This is the big lower league season preview podcast. Shaughan and I will analyse the prospects for all 30 teams in the Championship, League 1 and League 2 in painstaking detail. We will be starting with Airdrieonians, we will be finishing with Stranraer, and we will be discussing every single player, every single manager, and examining just how they will fare in the 2024-25 season. There will be no stone left unturned, no corner left behind, and by now you will know exactly what you are going to get from the pair of us. The biggest and the best podcast in Scottish football.
And what else would we rather be doing on this gloriously sunny day than sit inside Craig Fowler's house for 7 hours and talk about Spartans?
I honestly can't think of anything else. You know the expression touch grass? Like people say that's an insult. No, I don't want to touch grass. I want to talk. I want to sit and I want to talk about Scottish football. Now, Shaughan, our evaluations are based on a number of factors. That's how each side performed last time out, their transfer business over the summer, ins and outs, results and performances in the pre-season friendlies and the League Cup group stages, vibes, perhaps the most important, yes. And then just our general prejudices and inbuilt biases about all the sides. Shaughan mentioned we're recording this podcast in the early afternoon of Sunday the 28th of July. It's beautiful outside. The new season begins next weekend, so everything we are discussing is up to date and correct right of this second. So I really hope no other transfers take place between now and next Saturday. Otherwise, this podcast will be well out of date. Last year's podcast, that was 6 hours long.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think thorough. It was thorough. Yeah, we could probably record a 6-hour podcast in Inverness, Caledonian Thistle alone, but we'll see how we get on today. I'm hoping this is going to be a bit more succinct, but I've got 20,000 words of notes sitting in front of me about all the teams.
I think anything could happen. It could be more succinct. It could be considerably longer.
We'll see how we get on. But a ludicrous amount of research has gone into this.
I mean, as much as it was 6 hours last year, there was no fat.
There wasn't. No.
Warranted 6 hours.
Some people might have listened back to that and think, "Oh, I can't believe it." But I think you could go to any part and you would just get prime fillet steak of talking about Annan.
Exactly.
What
could you want?
You're not going to find that anywhere else. But very quickly, Shaughan, now we've got the housekeeping out of the way. How is everything generally?
Very well. My summer was excellent. I ticked something off my kind of bucket list that I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to see Scotland humiliate themselves at an international tournament. Managed that. But summer's been absolutely class. What about you?
Yes, at the time of my life, obviously I was out in Germany working with Scotland HQ, which was a genuine honour and a privilege to be part of. That was incredible. I think most people who are out there will say the same thing. The experience in Germany was a proper 10 out of 10. The football was probably a 2 out of 10. Let's say the night in Cologne.
Yes.
That was good.
Aye, yeah.
That was good. But we're not here to talk about the very best of Scottish football. No. We're here to talk about the kind of water you would find forming in a muddy puddle. This is what we're here to discuss, and we'll go through the divisions basically from the best to the worst, and we'll talk about the teams in alphabetical order. We'll start with the Championship, and I think this season's Championship is probably the most competitive that it's been in years. And what I mean by that is there's no big team in the level who shouldn't be there. You know, in the past we've seen Dundee United last season, Kilmarnock, Heart of Midlothian, teams who are really traditionally top flight sides. There are no part-time sides either, so no real bottom feeders, and it's fair to say that perhaps outside Queen's Park, who are perhaps the outliers, that all 10 teams are broadly of the same stature.
Yeah, and I think they would all have... I don't think there's anybody in this division right now who would say, right, our intention... Because in the past you've had teams that say, right, we want to stay in this division.
Yeah.
Our intention is to stay up. I would imagine that broadly amongst all 10 teams, they have ambitions that are far higher than that.
I would say that every single side going into this division will say we can get into the top 4.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some sides are perhaps better equipped for that than others, but I think that when you look at the makeup of that division, you analyse all 10 sides, you think, yes, every side, there's a case to be made for every side to finish in the top 4.
I agreed. And even teams that we might discuss in the next 3 hours or so that aren't in the best position to finish in the top 4, we've seen it in the past. It maybe only takes another 1 or 2 additions, and suddenly that can have a kind of transformative effect on a side.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, this podcast has been recorded on Sunday afternoon. All information is present and correct up to that date. So if any massive transfers take place, for instance, Stevie May to Raith Rovers is something that's been mooted. In fact, that's going to do nothing to change Raith Rovers' prospects. Just another player for Ian Murray to select on a Saturday. But we mentioned we're going to start with the teams in alphabetical order, and we will go to Monklands, and we will start with the Red Diamond, Airdrieonians. My all-time favourite piece of patter and pie in Bovril.
Has he now disappeared, the Red Diamond? It's like disappeared in shame.
I don't know.
Embarrassment.
For listeners, the story of the Red Diamond on pie in Bovril, there was an Airdrieonians fan who started with the username the Red Diamond and posted a thread called the Red Diamond about a game that Airdrie were taking part in. When fans pointed out that's not how threads are normally started, he panicked and tried to change the name. And then when Airdrieonians lost the match, the guy deleted the thread. And what you see now in Pine Bovril is every time there's an Airdrie match thread about the second post, and it's just the Red Diamond. And I don't know why, I find that really, really funny.
People can be so cruel. He was just attempting to go online and make friends with like-minded people, and he was essentially hounded off the website due to that. Well, not an easy mistake to make, but a mistake regardless.
But I mean, he was hounded off the website, but he has left a legacy. There's not many people. Not many people can say that about their time in Pine Bovril. But last season, I think it's fair to say, last season on the whole was an outstanding campaign for Airdrieonians.
Yep.
I mean, they were promoted into the championship via the playoffs. One of the most exciting teams to watch in the division. They won the SPFL Trust Trophy by beating TNS, and they finished the campaign in 4th place, narrowly lost out to Partick Thistle in the Premiership playoff quarter final. Rhys McCabe, the manager, has signed a contract extension with the club, probably the best signing they're likely to make this season. But there has been a turnover of players from the team. We've seen a number of reasonably high profile players have all moved on, and they've been replaced by a younger profile player from a bit further down the food chain, perhaps a bit hungrier with a point to prove. I haven't checked, but I'm going to assume that every single player they've signed is on the books of Consilium Sports.
Almost all of them.
But I mean, this relationship seems to have worked out quite well for them so far, and a pretty decent League Cup group campaign. Of course, beat East Kilbride 8-0. And they've beaten Dumbarton and Queen of the South along the way as well. But what are your thoughts on Airdrieonians' prospects for the season ahead, Shaughan?
I actually think that we are starting with one of the more interesting teams.
I think so.
In terms of 30 teams from Championship to League 2. In terms of, we spoke highly about Rhys McCabe. It was obviously done like a really good job. We weren't overly hopeful in terms of Airdrie's chances last season. I certainly had them in the bottom 2. You might have done as well. I can't remember. Absolutely punched above their weight, played good football, won games, and as is normally the case, especially when you are a lower league team that has
any degree of success,
and especially when they're on 1-year deals, then what happens is those players are kind of picked off essentially, and sometimes it feels like you get one shot at it like, in terms of getting promoted or whatever it is that you are looking to do. And when they lost players of the calibre, like players that were like kind of vital to what they achieved last season, so whether it was Josh Ray or Callum Fordyce or maybe to a lesser degree Ballantyne.
Charlie Telfer was a player of the year. He's away to Ross County.
Megwa, who went back, like he's such a good loan spell. And you think, right, they're replacing them with guys who maybe haven't played at championship level before. Lowland League, for example, League 2, guys coming across from the Irish League. I think, right, this is a massive test of McCabe, because it's the only thing that that he hasn't already proven, if that makes sense, which is, can he build his own team? And I know you can't read too much into a League Cup campaign, but it feels like they haven't really missed a beat. And bear in mind, this is almost not an entirely new team, but certainly the spine of this team is new, and that is a fairly big achievement, I would say.
I think so. I'm not sure, but I'd agree about the spine of the team being new. I think they've obviously got a new goalkeeper in Murray Johnson's coming on loan from Hibernian, and I think in terms of the strikers, Ben Wilson, it's coming from like Northern the League of Ireland football. I think he's coming from. He looks class. To be fair, he looks really, really good. I mean, got a hat trick against East Kilbride. has to be qualified by the fact that East Kilbride performance is perhaps the worst we're likely to see this decade.
Dreadful. I'd read that they were a well-coached team. They didn't look that well-coached, and certainly in that game.
Well, they're sticking to their principles. And if you can't see that, then that's your problem. But nevertheless, I think you're right in what you say in terms of the players that moved out there. Guys who like Telfer, Fordyce, Ballantyne, Megwa was one of the revelations of last season, and I think he's a player who might be on the move from Easter Road. I
think he's been involved to a degree in terms of that League Cup campaign, but you would imagine that he would be loaned out again, either to England or maybe to a team that, in fact, maybe even like a Premiership team.
Yes, if it was Partick Thistle, he'd be someone I'd be very, very keen to get my hands on. But it's the players that he's brought in, and I was looking through the spine of that team, and I think it's a really strong spine. We mentioned Murray Johnson's quite highly rated from his time at Hibernian. You've got Mason Hancock, who don't even know if he's going to be there by this time next week. He's a number of teams interested in him from England. Like, he's quite a classy defender. You know, that left-footed, can play at left back, can play at centre back. Really works well within that back three system. Adam Frizzell, the captain. You know, obviously he's going to, wherever Concilium Sports send him, that's basically where he's going to be playing. But he's developed into a really good defender. I think he's someone that keeps impressing as the season goes on. And we mentioned Ben Wilson, just looks astounding. It'll be really exciting to see how he develops. But on top of that, you've got guys who were perhaps in the fringes of the first team, made probably about like 30 appearances or so between them. Guys like Lewis McGregor, Dean McMaster. I think there's going to be a bit more responsibility put on their shoulders, given the more higher calibre of players that moved on. But they've looked good in the League Cup. McGregor especially, he looks like he's going to really bring something on top of that. He's got a number of goals so far already.
Yeah, when I saw the players that were moving on, I presumed that Airdrie would struggle to achieve what they achieved last season. Didn't necessarily think that they would be in bother, but I just didn't see them finishing top four. However, based on what I've seen so far, the fact that even the game they lost to Aberdeen, I thought they played pretty well. And certainly the first half, okay, Aberdeen maybe over the 90 minutes did warranted the 2-1 win, but regardless, been hugely impressed by them. And again, I would imagine that top four wouldn't be beyond them.
No,
certainly.
Definitely. They were a team that I would have in the top four. I was actually thinking about how to predict this division, and I found this one. In fact, I found a lot of these quite difficult to try and do, because there are cases to be made for all of them. But yeah, I do think Airdrie would be one of the teams. There are a couple of wildcard signings as well that they've made that I think is worth touching on. Chris Mockery could be a good sign. There's big things. Could be a good sign if he can stay fit.
That and the fact that he has had a couple of loan spells. I think off the top of my head, both of them were League One, Dunfermline and Montrose.
He was good at Montrose.
But did they not both go roughly the same way, whereas he started well, and then the longer the loan spell went, the less kind of prominent he was, and he eventually kind of dropped out?
So are you suggesting that the tactic for Chris Mock was just to move around from club to club on a month-by-month basis, just playing for a couple of games, and as soon as his performances drop between an 8, that's it, you're out the door? But he's obviously like a talented player, and I think that perhaps I read that Jim Goodwin was perhaps a bit disappointed to move him on, but it was for his own good to be playing first. Given his age, it's his early 20s, it's in his best interest to be playing first team football elsewhere, at a place where he's just going to be in that environment.
I think it was the best for Mockery, not only just to move on, but it kind of feels like Airdrie is probably the ideal place for him. Like, as in, they seem to be a team, and this is a terrible kind of description, but they play football the right way, in inverted commas. But they are certainly like Rhys McCabe is somebody who wants technically proficient footballers, and he gets a lot out of them. So I think it could be an ideal move for Mockery.
Yeah, definitely. And another player as well who I think is going to fit well into that environment is Rhys Armstrong, who's coming from Spartan. Saw him a couple of times last season in League Two, and you could tell straight away he looks really, really good. He's not the most physically imposing of midfielders. Someone who'll probably operate as between like a number 8 and number 10. Someone who want to push up and link the attack. But you could see like he's quite bold and adventurous when he gets the ball. He likes taking the ball in tight spaces. He likes being able to have a wee jinking him to create space for himself. And you saw one of his biggest contributions this season. It was against East Kilbride. Yes, you have to. I think everything with that game has to be quantified through the point that East Kilbride weren't very good. But he played a great through ball. I think it might have been through to McGregor. Proper defence split and pass, and that's shows what he's capable of. And I'll be really keen to see what he can do. He's obviously moving into full-time football. It's a huge step up from League 2 to the Championship, but it does feel like it is the right environment for him to blossom and maybe even kick on further.
It does. I do feel it's a massive, well, it is clearly a massive step up. When I saw the sign-in, it wasn't one that I was entirely sure would work out, although he looked a kind of step above League 2. To go from that, to go from a team that is looking to get promoted from League 2 to a team that's probably looking to get promoted from the Championship, that feels like a massive step up. However, like everybody else that he seems to have signed in the summer, he seems to have made the step up quite effortlessly so far. And I know they have played teams that are a division below them. Also, they look class against Aberdeen. Mm-hmm. So I think when the league business starts for real, I expect Airdrie to have a good campaign.
And he was able to, the game against Dumbarton as well, they're 3-1 down at one point. I think they were playing players who might be on the fringes of the starting 11.
Once they change things around, the game completely changed.
Got the big lads on and they ended up winning 4-3. On McCabe, he is one of the most talked about managers in the lower leagues, and it's given his age, given the fact that he came into the club, he still was late 20s when he took charge of Airdrieonians. Like his background, played for Rangers, that counts for something in a lot of places. His principles, as you've touched on, it really does make him an attractive prospect for a lot of teams looking for a manager. And it does feel, even though he has signed that new contract there, it does feel like it's a matter of time before he moves on elsewhere, further up the food chain.
I think Airdrie's success this season is, what I think is key is, can they keep Mason Hancock? Because I think he's now their best player and will be desired by other teams. There was a rumour like Aberdeen might have been interested, for example, even though he was there previously. Yeah. So that's key, and whether or not they can keep hold of Rhys McCabe. And I think if they start the league campaign as well as they competed last season, you would imagine that any team who jettisons their manager come October or November, then McCabe is very much going to be in their equation for a replacement. And I do think that McCabe is key to everything that Airdrie are doing.
Yeah, and another interest, not to ram the whole point home, doing too much. Well, it's a big podcast, we can do what we want with this. We can touch on how much we want. He does have a bit of a ruthless streak in him, and we saw that with there's something's obviously happened with Callum Fordyce. Now, Callum Fordyce was the assistant manager there, who was a player assistant manager. On top of that, he was Rhys McCabe's cousin, but he just was very quickly moved out the door and signed for Raith Rovers. He posted something on Twitter, a screenshot of his message thanking the Airdrieonians fans. Crucially, he didn't mention Rhys McCabe there. I wonder what's gone on between Fordyce and McCabe.
There appears to be some kind of fallout, and you're right. It appeared that quite sudden, and then McCabe's decision was made. Right, time to move him on. I mean, Ian Murray went on record to say that they hadn't approached him until he'd heard that he'd left Airdrie.
Right.
I mean, okay, fair enough. If that's the case, we'll take it at face value. But the transfer seemed to go very, very quickly if that was the case.
Probably 24 hours from him leaving Airdrie to signing for Raith Rovers. But that's very interesting. When I heard that, I thought, I don't know if Ian Murray's maybe approached him. He's gone to McCabe. There's been a fallout there, but perhaps like Ian Murray had nothing to do with that.
But if you take Murray at his word, then that wasn't the case. But who knows what they've fallen out about. But you're right, McCabe is decisive in terms of what he wants and moving people on, maybe if they don't want to be there.
I'm not sure if they've got the experience to challenge for the title this year. I think that might be beyond them. However, there's a lot of talent in that team. They can be very entertaining, and I'm expecting the same from them this season. I'm expecting 4th or 5th from Airdrie.
So am I, but I think that there are so many teams that are roughly the same level. I think there's maybe a fag paper between half a dozen teams, for example, and I do think as much as the replacements have impressed so far, I think it's different from doing that in the League Cup than doing it over 9 months in a league season, and I feel that they've probably just lost a wee bit too much experience and quality to repeat what they'd done last season. And if McCabe maybe doesn't last the full season, like that'll have an impact as well. I suspect that Airdrie will just miss out on the top 4, but I don't think it'll be by a lot. 5th. Let's go for 5th.
David Martindale leaves Livingston. Rhys McCabe replaces David Martindale at Livingston. David Hopkin comes in to replace Rhys McCabe. Airdrieonians finishing 10th. That's the worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario. But it is a scenario that could happen. You never know.
All of it could happen except McCabe wouldn't go to Livingston.
You don't think so?
Nah.
It's a sort of like a slight ways, like a diagonal upwards move.
I suppose in theory, but I think he has his sights set higher than Livy. Okay,
fair enough. Now, there was an Airdrie fan last season who got in touch with us to say that we got a number of things wrong when we discussed his club. I think I got about 2 things wrong in the first 5 minutes.
Is it Murray Aitken?
Murray Aitken, yeah.
His position?
I described him wrong. So hopefully we've come through the first 15 minutes or so unscathed. Otherwise, you're in for a long and incorrect listening experience. But we'll move from Monklands and we will move into Ayrshire and talk about the honest men. Scott Brown's Ayr United, because anytime a high profile player takes charge of a club that's perhaps not befitting of their stature, you have to refer to them as Player X and the name of the team. And this is Scott Brown's Ayr United. Now, last time out, pretty unremarkable for Ayr. They finished in 7th place, not good enough to challenge for the playoffs, and at points perhaps looking over their shoulder to avoid 9th place. Lee Bullen was dismissed in mid-January and he was replaced by Scott Brown, the former Celtic captain. We didn't necessarily see a huge upturn in form. They lacked consistency over the second part of the season, where they would lose, then win, then lose, then win. But I think there is a fair degree of optimism around Somerset Park this season. I think they've signed well, experienced, well-known campaigners. They've redeveloped the North Stand. That looks absolutely stunning. And I think they're in with a decent shout of challenging to win the title this year.
I don't know if I agree about that.
Okay.
Maybe. You could be right. But I definitely think that you've said that there are grounds for optimism. Totally agree. I've mentioned before on preview podcasts that I think that Ayr United fans, maybe just on Pine Bovril, and I know that isn't necessarily representative of the entire Ayr United fan base.
You should you know what you should start doing? Looking at these teams' Facebook pages, because apparently that's like the sort of the QAnon version of a Scottish supporters fan base live on Facebook.
But I do think that each summer, Pine Bovril Ayr fans seem unusually optimistic, and often I can't quite place why. And by optimistic, I mean there's no reason we can't challenge for the top 4. But I'll look through their squad and I'll think, I'm not so sure. There's about half a dozen teams that on paper I think have a better squad than you, and quite often in the dugout they have a manager who I don't particularly rate. So they maybe have like an average squad and a terrible manager. Can never understand why they're so optimistic. This year though, I think you're absolutely right. I think they have. Okay, there hasn't been a huge amount of time to judge Scott Brown, but I do think he knows what he's doing at the very least, and that's probably an upgrade on a number of managers that they've had recently. I think they've signed very well. I think they have a board or an owner who is, I don't know if splashing the cash is the right term to use, but certainly there is money there. And I think they will probably strengthen even further. Yeah.
And crucially, a lot of that money's been spent in infrastructure. Yeah. A lot of the time when people come in, it's all just about getting signings in and try to make the team on the pitch as successful as possible. But by redeveloping that stand, there's a lot of money being spent in it, but that is going to hold the club in good stead forward for years into the future.
But I also don't think they've necessarily scrimped on the
No.
I think they've brought in players that have been over the course at this level and have performed well at this level, and I expect Ayr to have a good season.
Yeah, definitely. I saw Ayr against Stenhousemuir on Tuesday night in the League Cup, and similar to what we were saying about Airdrieonians and East Kilbride, everything has to be contextualised by the gulf in quality between the teams. I was very impressed with what I saw from Ayr United. When they lined up, they had Scott McMahon at centre back and Frankie Musonda at left back, and I thought, well, hang on, are they not the wrong way round? Like Scott McMahon surely not being brought in to play at centre back, but then very quickly you see what they're doing. And Frankie Musonda spent pretty much the entire half playing as a central midfielder. He was coming in and basically the defence was just shifting over, so Scott McMahon was effectively operating as like a left-sided centre-back alongside George Stanger, a position that really suited him well. But Musonda was a revelation. I always assumed him was just a big strong boy who could head and kick the ball, play a little bit of football, but sort of a better version of Sean McGinty. You know, I actually didn't appreciate just how versatile he was and how much he brought to that team. And watching Ayr United play, it looked as though they had an extra man on the pitch. And what I got from them was they look a really, really well coached side. There's not a lot of teams going. When I saw them line up, not a lot of teams play 4-4-2 these days, where you've got Anton Dowds and George Oakley up front, two big guys. I mean, and that's not to denigrate them because they're both quality football players. But to see them there, I think it's quite an old-fashioned way of playing. But then, no, it's a very new-fashioned way of playing with these underlapping fullbacks. And I just thought they were very, very good. They scored 4 goals, all from like cross balls. Come on, talk about Stennis, the problems that Stennis you're having this season. But I think he saw a weakness, knew how to exploit it, and they really, really exploited it. And they ended up winning the match 4. And they lost a goal, actually. They conceded first, but bounced back from it immediately. And then just barely gave the visitor a sniff. I think Scott Brown he's managed to get his ideas across pretty quickly there. I think so too. The only thing that would concern me a wee bit, the flip side of what you've just described is, so a couple of things on Musonda. So he, I thought he was a very, very good centre-half at starts back. Decent footballer as well. Couldn't really keep him fit. And for a lot of the time, he had to fill in a lot of time at right back. Maybe had a couple of games at left back for us, I think. But maybe I'm misremembering. And was competent enough, could get forward and kind of do what you would want from a kind of attacking fullback, I suppose. I suppose my only concern about him, what you've just described against Stenny, is, and I could be totally wrong, but I do think sometimes that maybe Scott Brown is getting too fancy, because although I haven't watched the highlights, what I read is Musonda came on as a kind of forward right-sided player against Bucky. And I think I'm saying, sometimes you can overthink things a wee bit too much. There is nothing wrong with playing a left back and a centre half at centre half, and maybe not playing a centre half at the right hand side of midfield. And especially when you needed goals, as he did against Bucky at the weekend. So I do wonder if maybe Scott Brown does potentially overthink things. But I think in terms of like we haven't mentioned Roos, and it's like, well, how on earth have you managed to bring this guy in? Because he's come from Coventry. Yeah,
looks a level above most players you would see in the Championship.
His goal against Dundee United was absolutely super. A solo run and a really good finish. Yeah, he looks like he's got a really, really high ceiling. I'm really, really keen to see how he develops. The point about Musonda, maybe he has it sometimes takes a coach just to work with a player and maybe unlock something, and he sees something that no one else has seen before, and maybe he sees Frankie Musonda as somebody that can do a bit of everything. He can be a player that he can throw him into any position and he can perform from, do what he wants.
And I remember not long after he arrived at Raith, John McGuigan spoke about the fact that he felt he could play further forward, maybe as a holding midfielder, and ultimately because of injuries to people around him and him, and the fact that he was away on international duty at points as well, we never really got to find out if that was something that was feasible. I think because he's a decent footballer, he probably can do it. So I wasn't that surprised, I suppose, to hear how impressive he was at the left hand side and getting forward. And you said he was a kind of auxiliary midfielder at points. So I do.
He scored a goal in open play he from a header in the box. It's like how on it? What are you doing there? What are you doing there? It was like it was one of those performances. Just that it's like, my goodness, I was not expecting this from Ayr United or from Frankie Musonda, but it certainly worked, and they were fantastic that night. And in terms of his signings, perhaps the most notable signings that he's made are up front, where he has brought in George Oakley from Greenock Morton. George Oakley, I think his last 2 seasons with Greenock Morton, he's never been particularly prolific, but he was really good. I think Dougie Emery managed to unlock something in there. He's already started scoring this season. And Anton Dowds is coming on loan on a permanent basis from Partick Thistle. What sort of front line do you think they'll form between them?
I think they'll be hugely effective. I think if you have, you're right in terms of Oakley is, it's probably like, it sounds like I'm slagging off to say he's just like a kind of a battler and a bully, because he's quite a good footballer as well.
Yeah.
But he isn't somebody who's going to get you, I don't think he would score 15 goals, for example. Dowds, I think, can, but probably isn't as good a footballer as
I know what you mean.
So I think as a combination they'll do very, very well. I suppose the only downside is that seems to be it in terms of a forward line. I don't think is it Fraser Bryden, for example, that they might
benefit us from moving elsewhere.
If they can bring somebody else in, then I think they're set in those forward positions. I think Oakley and Dowds might be as good a forward line, because I think there will be a 2 for the vast majority of the season. And that'll probably be as good as you'll get, I think, in the championship.
Because on top of that as well, and again, got to qualify it by saying it was against Stennismuir in the League Cup, but you've got wingers as well that like to take their men on and get the ball into the box. You've got Jake Hastie on one side and Jay Henderson on the other side. Henderson was excellent against the Warriors. I mean, he set up 2 goals, scored one of them, and just very, very quick. He's perhaps the only player in that team who's under 6 foot as well, because he's assembled a pretty group of big strapping boys there, but someone who's fast, someone who's tricky, someone will look to, a lot of the time with wingers these days, managers want to play them like inverted wingers, and so they come on side to the wrong foot, but no, he's very much using this term, chalking the boot swinger, who'll want to hit it and whip balls in, and that is obviously going to benefit guys like Oakley, and Oakley especially, who's really good in there, but Dowds is good as well. They've got Jake Hastie on the other wing. You're making a face there. I think this is a really, really big season for Jake Hastie, because let's be honest, the only spells in his career that have where he's looked at like achieving his potential, a loan spell at Ayr Athletic, and then the period at Motherwell before he got his move.
6 weeks maybe
before he got his move to Rangers, and ever since then, I think very early doors at Rangers. I can't remember who the manager at the time was. Was it Gerrard? Was the manager at the time? I can't remember, but very quickly decided, I don't think you're good enough. And then it's a series of loan spells with diminishing returns. Went to Hartlepool. And didn't really make much of an impact there. Came on loan to Hamilton Accies, and again didn't have much of an impact. And what was ultimately a very successful season for the Accies. So it really does feel like this is a big season for Jake Hastie. One, to just like establish himself as a first team player in a team who are looking to be successful, but just to enjoy football again. Because when you saw him breaking through at Alloa and Motherwell, I thought, this guy's got a really high ceiling. And yeah, there's I remember talking to Graham Thewlis, a Motherwell fan, about him, and either limits in his game where perhaps he's quite tunnel vision. A lot of times it's like sort of head down, run forward. There's elements of his game that he's not been quite able to iron out. However, just because you don't make it at Rangers doesn't mean you can't make it elsewhere. And I think that for him, this is a big season for him, just in terms of being able to enjoy himself, express himself on the football pitch, and chip in with what Ayr United are looking to do.
So in terms of both of them, in terms of Jay Henderson, in terms of Jake Hastie, I'm not entirely sure either of them, or certainly I don't think both of them will be a success this season.
Oh, okay. After me giving all that expression, you could have interrupted me a lot quicker there.
No,
so.
You're right, but you're right. So he has already demonstrated at 2 clubs now that he has the ability to be a success. Both are very short periods of time though in his career so far. So you're right, this is a key season for him. Henderson again has demonstrated that he could be decent. Didn't really do very much at Ross County before joining Ayr. However, even if, and this is why I think Ayr will have a good season, even if both those players have a kind of mediocre campaign or just have kind of fits and starts of form, like they still have like Scott McMahon, I think is a tremendous signing.
That's felt like a real coup getting him in.
Jamie Murphy is still to kind of come in. I don't know if he's had any role or too many minutes in the League Cup so far.
The last time we spoke about Jamie Murphy on this podcast, that was 12 months ago, where he got his golf club stolen. Jamie, do get in touch with myself and Shaughan and let us know if you managed to get those golf clubs back, because that was the big drama. But yeah, Jamie Murphy's a player that's going to add something. I mean, Aidan McGeady's still there.
I'm less convinced that he'll have a positive impact this season.
I honestly, for the life of me, thinking, why on earth would you sign like a 36-year-old Aidan McGeady? I know he was coming in as a player/technical director role.
Seems to be some kind of administrator.
Yeah,
like he's just like drawing up a rota every week.
He's in the office. He's doing like a lottery collecting a pound in from everyone for a big lottery sweepstake. I don't know. It just seemed like a strange signing, and I don't think we'll see him much this season. But there are attacking options. Ben Dempsey as well was another player who showed up quite well in the central midfield. We'll talk about their defence, and we'll talk about their goalkeeper who they've taken on loan. Charlie Albinson has moved on to Hamilton Accies, but they brought in Harry Stone from Heart of Midlothian, and I think he was one of the few Queen of the South players. He was on loan from Hearts. He was one of the few Queen of the South players to merge with any credit last season, and similar to Hasty, but in a sort of different way, this is a really big season for him, because I think this is the season where Heart of Midlothian will be like, it's a fork in the road for him. You do well at Ayr United, there's a chance for you to kick on and make a name for yourself at Tynecastle, because Craig Gordon can't be far away from the tombstone. I mean, in football in terms, obviously, not in terms of his own mortality, but this is the season where he could come in and perhaps like offer competition to Xander Clark if he does well. If he doesn't do well, then Hearts might just cut their losses and loan him elsewhere. I mean, he has been on loan at this level for Partick Thistle, but he only made 2 league appearances there. I think he performed, if I'm quite right in saying, quite badly in a cup competition. Ian McCall never really trusted him and didn't really field him again. So this is the season where Hearts will want to see him play consistently, and I'll determine whether or not he's got a future there. I think he's a big goalkeeper. He's got a good command. He just needs to. The unfortunate thing for United is he could make mistakes this season, and he'll be making them on Scott Brown's time, which is unfortunate. However, I think he has got the capacity to move up and be what Hearts want him to be.
I mean, the fact that Queen of South conceded so many goals last season, and there was very few that he seemed to be responsible for. You're right, Queen of South fans didn't really have a bad word to say about him. One of the few Queen of South players that nobody had a bad word to say about in the last campaign. He didn't show up superbly against Dundee United in that 2-1 defeat. I think it was like the first goal. He probably could have done a wee bit better. I seemed to misjudge the flight of the ball. Regardless of that mistake, I think it's a decent sign, and I know, well, the rumour was that John McGuigan was really keen to bring him in over the summer, but Ayr United were able to fend it off, and I think they've signed a solid goalkeeper. I think he has a lot of work to do to be good enough for Hearts, but regardless, I think he'll be more than good enough for a good championship team. What
about Michael Devlin, coming from Livingston? Wasn't very highly rated by Livingston fans last season, and he's a player who Scott Brown had previously worked with at Fleetwood Town, a player who's previously been good before. Obviously he's been capped a couple of times for Scotland. I wonder if he might fare better having moved down a level into the championship.
We've just spoke about Stone, who had very few negative comments from last season. That wasn't the case for Devlin, but I still don't think that means that you'd write him off completely. It's far easier to play in a back four for a good championship team than it is for a struggling premiership team. But no, I wouldn't say I was entirely as sold on that signing as I am about Stone.
I think you'll probably be Scott McMahon and George Stanger at centre back, and there's a player as well we need to talk about. I think this guy could be the next big thing, and that's Dylan Wattrett, who's the academy graduate. He was loaned out to East Stirlingshire last season, did very well in the Lowland League. I think East Stirlingshire United, that's quite a connection that seems to work quite well. All the Ecripont's gone on there for a second loan spell, but he impressed in the League Cup against Falkirk. I know that match, although United won at 1-0, Falkirk, based on the chances they had, should have at least tied the game, but nevertheless he was up against Calvin Miller and did really well against him, and there's talk if he progresses well over the course of the season he can move on to much bigger and better things. Quite an unheralded talent as well. I think he'd played just a handful of times for the first team, but he's come back and he's made a really, really strong impact for them.
He's one of those players where like gets a lot of compliments and you think, right, so is he getting compliments because he's young and because he's a kind of local player? And is he getting compliments because he's not played that many games? But I watched him against Dundee United and I genuinely thought he was excellent. So no, he is a talent. Hopefully he stays at Ayr for a long while, gets a load of games under his belt before moving on, but no, he looks excellent.
So you don't think they can challenge for the title?
No, I don't have them in the top 2. I think if they don't finish in top 4, you would say that was a huge disappointment. You're right, that would be a failure. I have them as, what will I say, 3rd. I'll have them as 3rd.
I think that's conceivable. And just before we move on, I've just got in my notes here that Jamie Murphy's out with a wrist injury at the moment. So it just seems to be there's golf clubs, wrist injuries. The man isn't really having any luck at anything that he needs to use his hands for. So I think if there's a connection between golf and wrists, obviously you play it, but I don't know. I
think there's a connection between wrists and golf clubs.
Yeah, but
imagine how injured these wrists would be if he did have golf clubs.
He got his wrist injured by trying to fend off people that were stealing his golf clubs. That's how he managed it. Now, Shaughan, we're talking about teams there who we think can challenge to get into the playoffs, maybe challenge for the title. Let's talk about a team who probably won't do either. Given all the big talk at the start that we said, I think every team will legitimately see themselves as top 4 contenders. Let's talk about Dunfermline Athletic. And last season was probably a so-so campaign for Dunfermline because, of course, they were promoted into the second tier as League One champions. And they spent half the season pushing for a top 4 finish, but they went through a terrible run of injuries before falling down division and concluding the year in 6th. And I think the expectations for this season, they seem to be fairly pessimistic. The League Cup campaign was mediocre. They have had no luck in terms of injuries and no luck in terms of trying to sign players. I'm sure that I read that they have...
I don't know if that's to do with luck. That's more ineptitude.
Right, we'll come on and talk about Kai McLean very shortly. But it feels as though that every player that James McPake has tried to go in for has gone elsewhere. And so it just feels like if I was a Pars fan, I would feel frustrated and slightly cautious about these next 12 months.
Yeah, I remember what we said about Dunfermline 12 months ago, and it was you've come up for League One and essentially you haven't really felt like they hadn't made enough new signings.
No, effectively just signing...
Tied down the loan players that have done so well in League One. To a degree, they've kind of done that again. So they've brought in Chris Kane, who made a massive difference.
Yeah.
I think that is a genuinely good signing. Okay, they brought in David Witherspoon as well. I think that is a good signing. As long as you can keep both of them fit, I think both of them are very good signings.
Yeah.
But that is a big caveat. I am not overly sure about Kieran Ngwenya in terms of replacing Josh Edwards at left back.
Big shoes to fill.
And that's about it. And bear in mind, a lot of the loan players that they brought in latterly done really well, and ultimately, I suppose, kind of kept them up or kept them away from trouble, I suppose, at the bottom end of that division. If you add in the fact that I do think they have a manager who, A, isn't getting the best out of the squad of players that he has, and probably tries to get a style of play out of them and plays them in a formation that doesn't suit them, then I don't sense too much positivity from East End Park, and I'm not expecting too much from them.
There's actually quite a number of things to talk about. We'll talk about the style of play first of all, because there was an article in the Courier, it was an interview with Sam Fisher, where he explained that fans will need to be patient as the team adapt to a new way of playing. In fact, what McPake wants them to do is play the ball out from the back, and the idea is to progress it forward and give it to Witherspoon. I think he's going to be the talisman. I think it will just be give the ball to Witherspoon and hopefully he can make something happen. I just worry that they don't necessarily have the players to try and execute that, because like Rhys Breen, decent stopper, Kel Benedictus, very good stopper. Oh, he's injured. I think he's injured or he's recovering from injury at the moment. That'll be a recurring theme when we talk about Dunfermline. But it just feels like, yes, these are good things in practice, but I don't think you've got the players to do it. For instance, well, come on, just as a comparison, like at Ayr United, one of the guys who was moved on very quickly by Scott Brown was Shaughan McGuinty. He's gone to Hamilton Accies. Now, for all his faults, like Shaughan McGuinty is, like, for championship level, a decent centre back. You know, a big strong player, can organise, can head, kick, all sorts of stuff. But for what Scott Brown wants to do, he's not compatible with it, so he had to move him on. And I think that the Hamilton will benefit from having someone like McGuinty in there. However, it's not as if that like James McPake's been able to move on Rhys Breen and bring in Scott McMahon, who can do that sort of stuff. You know, it's like you're trying to teach a player. I mean, how old's Breen? Breen will be like 23, 24. You're trying to fundamentally change how he plays at this stage of his career. Maybe I'm reading too much into this interview.
But see, the weird thing about the interview, the only thing I would say about the interview that I thought was strange was this doesn't feel like a new style of play. They were trying to play it for the back. I mean, watching Dunfermline games last season, highlights, remember the Morton game where I think I can see the 5 at East End Park?
Yeah, I remember
a number of those goals were attempting to play it from the back. This isn't really a new style of play. Maybe trying to play it through Witherspoon is the new element, but everything else was exactly the same. It didn't really work last season, so I'm not entirely sure why it's going to work this season, and certainly the League Cup campaign, it hasn't worked at all.
No, it hasn't worked at all. I mean, like, beaten 2-0 at home by a middling Forfar Athletic side as well. That's the sort of reference. They lost to Cove Rangers. How embarrassing. Imagine losing to them. On top of that, like, David Witherspoon is saying, now we all know how talented a player David Witherspoon is, but he's joined the club as a player coach. He said that he wants to use this opportunity at Dunfermline Athletic to get into Canada's team for the 2026 World Cup. Now, I'd love to go out with Dua Lipa and Sydney Sweeney at the same time. Now, it's possible that might happen at some point. It's possible it might happen, but it's very unlikely.
Don't think that's the wrong way. I think Witherspoon has more chance of getting to the World Cup.
Very unlikely, though. That's the point I was making. There's a chance. There's a very small chance, but very unlikely.
Aye, I'm not seeing it. With the greatest will in the world, like David Witherspoon, he will make a positive contribution, I would imagine, to this Dunfermline team. But with I don't see him getting to the 2026.
What about the goalkeeper situation as
Hilarious.
well at the club? This is very funny. I mean, they were playing pre-season games. I think am I right in saying they maybe played a League Cup game with just Dennis Mehmet in goals? They weren't able to list a substitute goalkeeper on the bench. They brought in Kai McLean from Celtic, but because he wasn't registered properly, he's not going to be available for selection until January when the transfer window opens.
Now, is that right, or is it that because initially they said that he was going to be signed for a month? Then they announced that actually that wasn't possible. You can't just sign a goalkeeper for a month. He had to be registered until January.
Right.
And I thought at that point that they therefore hadn't signed him and were still making a decision about him.
Yeah, well, he's still not been registered properly. Anyway. That's the point. So effectively, you've got a goalkeeper there who will just be training until January. And Mehmet has got his critics.
I think I've now watched every single Dunfermline friendly and League Cup highlights. I think Mehmet has been at fault for a goal in every single one.
It's a concern.
And I appreciate not everybody is against McPake, and people feel that he has been hung out to dry by a board that isn't spending as much money as Dunfermline fans would expect, especially when they've got a fan base that has backed them, whether it was in League
Definitely.
One or whether they're doing poorly in the Championship or well in the Championship. They always have a big support. But for whatever reason, they're a club that is hemorrhaging money. Like the accounts that they keep posting, keep losing a fortune, and it feels like that the board is very much keeping the purse strings tight. So whether you think that McPake's hands are tied behind his back in terms of putting a good team on the park, however, given Mehmet a 3-year deal was a terrible piece of business by McPake.
They gave him a 3-year deal. Was that midway or towards the end of the season? He won League One. Am I right in saying that?
And he kept a load of clean sheets. But regardless, like, they had a really good defence in front of him. It was, as much as they barely conceded any goals.
You're playing in League One.
Exactly. And I always felt that was in spite of Mehmet rather than because of him.
I remember that. It was like Kel Benedictus was the best player in League One that season. And he really galvanised that defence and kept the ball as far away from Dunfermline's goal as possible. Which ultimately, if you look at the naked stats, you think, Christ, that Dennis Mehmet is really good. Times would just be taking goal kicks in games because the defence was so offering so much protection. It's a concern. It's a concern as well. It just feels like that optimism, that galvanising effect that winning League One had on the club. Because if you remember the relegation under Peter Grant and John Hughes, I mean, hapless.
I watch it back every week.
They were hapless that season, and it took McPake coming in and winning and beating. They were going neck and neck with Falkirk for the title. So a number of factors that just allowed such a good feeling at the club, and it just feels like they haven't built on it, and it must be so frustrating for the manager. McPake's got his critics for again, we're talking about trying to play a way of football that's perhaps incompatible, but it does feel like he isn't getting the support from the people above him to build a team that allow these players to flourish. And like Dunfermline have got the potential, like on paper, Dunfermline are maybe next to Falkirk, the biggest side in the division.
Dunfermline should always be a team.
So Partick Thistle in there as well, sorry. But you know what I mean, they're one of the biggest teams in the division.
They should always be a team that if they're in the Championship, their ambition is, and to be fair, I'm sure it still is, but they should have a squad that is geared to getting back into the top flight. And it's been a long time since you can say that about Dunfermline.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's, and on top of that as well, we talk about injuries. There's Matty Todd having to get surgery on a collarbone, so he's probably going out for 3 months. He's a really important way to how the team play. Yeah, it just really feels like there's a malaise there, and that shouldn't be. That shouldn't be the case.
And another concern, I suppose, is I've mentioned the fact that like Chris Kane was vital to them their mid-table position that they ended up as last term, hasn't played in the League Cup. I actually thought he did play against Cove Rangers. I'd forgotten that Craig Whiting is now completely bald. The only thing that you would say about Cove is that they created chances, but they were so wasteful. But on another day, they would have won that probably quite comfortably. But the concerning thing is, I mean, like Cove's, certainly the second one where the centre-half just was like a kind of chasm between them for that second goal. So I think this will be another... it might not be forgettable, but because I think it could be so bad that they might be in danger at the bottom end. What I think will happen, how I think their season will pan out, is they will be extremely poor, be in danger of getting relegated. James McPake won't last the season.
Reece McCabe comes in.
Reece McCabe comes in. They will, again, probably sign players in January, use the loan market, and if they can do it as well as they did last season, they'll probably end up safe. But I don't think it'll be I think it could be a long season.
Yeah, I think it's a frustrating thing. It must be a frustrating thing for managers. It's certainly a frustrating thing for fans. Ideally, you want to start these League Cup group stages with all your players signed up, or you want your players all signed up by like June. You know, so the manager's got full summer to work on them, and the players can bond and so on. And coming into this next week ahead, where you're looking to sign like 2 or 3 players, in some teams' cases maybe more, and you're just relying on like a bit of luck, hoping the board can give you a wee bit more money, a player deciding to go for you over someone else.
But it always feels as well that the players that they want to sign clearly are players who are wanted by other clubs, and it always feels like that they are getting outbid by those other clubs. And again, that's just another example of the fact that they, I suppose, have to be very careful what they do with their budget, because I know that they are building infrastructure. You know, they're trying to build a training ground or an academy or whatever it is. But my goodness, they're hemorrhaging money at clearly an unsustainable rate.
Who are some of the guys that they've gone in for? I said that at the top, but I actually forgot to make a note. Did they go in for George Oakley? Am I right in saying that?
Well, whether it was true or not.
Or was that Paper Street Talk? Who was
whether it was true or not, they were linked with Lewis Stevenson and Paul Hanlon.
Right, okay.
Both of whom went to Raith Rovers.
Sore one. I think you might be right. I can see them on a good day challenging for the top 4. I think it might be 8th.
8th is where I'll
pick
them.
Their away shirt's very nice.
That's nice.
Very nice.
That's a positive.
Now, let's go across the water to their rivals, Falkirk. And after 5 long years in the wilderness, the Bairns are back in the big time. They enjoyed a phenomenal season last time out. They won League One title very comfortably, and on top of that, they enjoyed an invincible campaign. And it might perhaps be the best season that fans have had maybe in the past 20 years or so.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
It's maybe not for us to say, but I'm going to say it. The best season that they had in the past 20 years. Now, there's been very little turnover in the playing squad. They've got 1 or 2 new signings. 2 loans have been made permanent. The chairman posted a statement on the club website in late May saying that the finances were tight, but there's still a wee bit increase to the budget. And just earlier in the week there, John McGuigan was in the Falkirk Herald, perhaps complaining about the amount of money he had to spend, although I'm not sure if that was a complaint or he was perhaps managing expectations. Some supporters might have been carried away after last season's sterling showing, expect them to win the league title. I think perhaps a top 4 finish is more likely for the Bairns this season.
Yeah, I think so as well, and I think that, like, yes, they went last season unbeaten, an incredible achievement. Yeah. But I think you can compare it. I think you can compare a lot of this Falkirk team to the previous League One winning side, which is Dunfermline. Remember, Dunfermline only lost 1 league game as well, so they were only 1 game away from going the season unbeaten in League One. I think the biggest difference is that they went about winning League One in entirely different ways. Like, Dunfermline's success was based on clean sheets and solidity. Falkirk just swept teams away. Do you remember the game where Falkirk were playing at 5:30? I can't remember who Hamilton were playing. Hamilton were playing early in the day, and basically Hamilton needed to win to prevent Falkirk from winning the league, but they drew. So Falkirk had won the league title without playing. They were playing Montrose at 5:30, and it had been easy for them to perhaps got caught up in the fact they won the league and maybe a bit complacent, take their eye off the ball. They won like 7-1. They absolutely demolished Montrose. And then it became, between then and the rest of the season, this relentlessness to, like, we cannot get beat. And if you remember the final day of the season where they went 2-0 down at Alloa, perhaps the biggest cheer of that campaign, I can't remember who scored it, but that equalising goal going in to confirm that it was an unbeaten league campaign. So it does feel, you're right in terms of what you say, momentum. It just feels like with Dunfermline going up, it was
I know that was a really positive thing for the fans, that the fact that again, I'm going to use the term again, but that galvanising effect. But it really feels like that Falkirk, there's a lot of momentum behind them. I mean, they were excellent in the League Cup group stages. They topped the division, and that's them qualifying for the knockout stages. So they have built on that momentum into this new season.
But in the same way, in terms of the transfer market this summer, similarly to Dunfermline last season, they haven't made too many new additions. Two of the four are players who were on loan there last season. The other couple, in terms of Mikey McKenna and Jamie Snedden, fine. I think good, decent squad additions. Maybe let's say decent squad additions. And I think as much as what will differ from Dunfermline is I think they have a number of players who can cause damage to good championship teams. Where I think it's where Dunfermline were lacking last season. At the opposite side of the park, I do think there's maybe question marks about that back four, and probably certainly the goalkeepers have their books as well. And I think that might be what lets them down. I think they will carry the momentum that they have. I think maybe the first quarter, maybe the first third of the season, I would imagine Falkirk would do very, very well. I think it'll probably not fizzle out, but I think they might regress slightly for maybe the final half of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished top four. I don't know if they quite have enough about them to... I can see them finishing fifth, but again, wouldn't be surprised if they finished top four. Don't think they have enough about them to challenge for the title.
A lot to unpack there, Shaughan. A lot to unpack. So we'll just go what I've got written down in front of me and go through it piece by piece. We'll talk about the signings first of all. We'll talk about the players that have come in on a permanent basis. First is Ethan Ross, who came in from Raith Rovers. Another one is Dylan Tate, who joined from Hibernian on a permanent basis. Tate is the one that I think that I'm most impressed with. I think Tate's probably got a higher ceiling out of the two players, and I think that last season and carried into last season because he was started the first half of the campaign on loan with Hamilton Accies and was quite ordinary. Certainly didn't stand out, and then he joins Falkirk and suddenly he looks like an absolutely phenomenal player. And I think that there's a good feeling about getting him on a permanent basis because it seems at Falkirk that he perhaps enjoyed the best spell of his career, maybe since he broke through at Raith Rovers, that ultimately earned him the move to Hibernian. But they're both players that you'll know very well, Shaughan. What could we expect from Ethan Ross and Dylan Tate?
So in terms of Ethan Ross, I'm not entirely sure he will start most games for Falkirk. I think he has a burst of pace. I think he can beat a man. But I think they might already have better
players in front of him.
I think Calvin Miller, for example, is probably a wee bit ahead of him. So, but I think in terms of bringing him off a bench and maybe playing him against a tiring back four, brilliant option. In terms of Tate, I always thought he was probably a wee bit better playing behind a forward. I think you've had teams in the past that maybe tried to play him out wide. Raith maybe played him a wee bit deeper, which I didn't think suited him. However, at Falkirk under McGuigan, it seems to be maybe him and Brad Spencer that maybe sit in front of the back four. But Tate is probably the one who is happier to kind of get forward and can cause damage in the final third. And it looks like Tate is at last, for the first time in whatever it is, maybe 3 years, looks like the player that kind of left Starts Park originally.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what you want to see is when guys leave. It's because you can sometimes, as a fan, if they go elsewhere, kind of, I lost his way and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if there was circumstance behind it, but it's good if a player does lose his way and can regain it again. And that looks like what Dylan Tate's done at Falkirk. They're the two signings, the loans that have been made permanent. We'll talk about the other two signings you made. Michael McKenna, who's coming from Arbroath. He was the first player to sign. I think that he actually joined quite early on, even maybe before the season finished. I can't quite remember, but nevertheless, Mikey McKenna is the first player that's come from Arbroath. 33-year-old tacker, had very, very briefly played full-time football at Livingston. That was 9 years ago. He was the best player in the championship with Arbroath in the 2021-22 campaign. Hasn't been very good, or hasn't been amazing, hasn't hit those heights in the past 2 years. And when I look at that Falkirk team and I look at the players that perhaps occupy the centre forward position, the players that play off the striker, I'm not sure what he's bringing to Falkirk, to be honest. Maybe I've not really seen him. Came on late against Stennismuir, they'd been put a bit of digging, but I didn't really see anything that think, wow, that's a guy who is worth signing from part-time football to invest in full-time football. I'm not 100% sure what he's bringing to Falkirk.
If he had went full-time on the back of that season at Arbroath, whatever full-time team he went to, you would say, well, that's an interesting signing. I wonder if he'll kick on. I wonder if he can continue that momentum that he had at Arbroath. Now, rather than it being interesting, it feels unusual. Like, because there are already a number of players that can play behind the striker at Falkirk. Whether he is the best of that bunch, I'm not entirely sure. Again, though, probably a good squad option, I suppose. But I think his opportunities at Falkirk might be limited.
He goes back on loan to Arbroath in January.
And helps them win League One.
Yeah, there's a shoot prediction there. There's a shoot prediction. But McKenna is a man who thrives on people writing him off. I think that there was something that he gave an interview where he said that even the SPFL had written them off for something. I can't remember exactly what it was.
That? Yeah, you're right.
I was thinking,
that rings a bell. I can't think what it was in regards to.
The SPFL wouldn't do that. You know, everything's very positive. You from having written for the SPFL in the past, you're not allowed to criticise people. Anytime that you put even something like something even that remotely looks critical, that gets excised before it's published. So I don't know what he was talking about.
Does enjoy a conspiracy though.
He does enjoy a conspiracy. He doesn't like vaccines.
Loves conspiracies. Hates Jags.
What is it, that thing that he posted before locking his Twitter account? Unvaccinated lives matter. What a crank. The other player you mentioned, well, Jamie Snedden, could be a good sign. He has come in from Partick Thistle. I think his time at Partick Thistle, where he was sometimes the first choice keeper, sometimes he wasn't the first choice keeper, and I think he ultimately lost out to David Mitchell there. He is going to be competing with Nicky Hogarth for the number 1 spot. And I think if there was any criticisms of John McGuigan last season, it was that he didn't have an undisputed number 1. He would switch between Nicky Hogarth and Sam Long, the boy that they had, and there wasn't really much between them. I always think it's not good economics. Invest in a good undisputed number 1 goalkeeper, and then get some like local kiddie on the bench that you can kick
and
balls.
Hope you never have to use him.
Hope you never have to use him. And if you have to use him, you're straight on the phone to Hibs and Hearts. Give us a goalkeeper, please. That's how it works. What do you think of Snedden signing?
The good thing is that I couldn't agree more, and I feel that might be something that has hindered Jamie Snedden in the past, because I felt like Partick Thistle had a couple of goalkeepers that were roughly of a kind of similar level, with the exception of Ross Stewart, obviously.
We'll come on and talk about him when we get to Queen of the South, don't worry.
However, we'll probably have a situation again with Jamie Snedden where I don't know if there's that much between him and Hogarth. I think Hogarth certainly has the jersey at the moment. I think Falkirk are goalkeeper wise in the same position as last season. They have 2 goalkeepers who are probably okay. I don't know if I would have them in the better goalkeepers in the division. That's the only thing. No, I don't think they're bad by any stretch of the imagination. They're fine.
No, there are some good goalkeepers in the division. If I was to do a top 10 goalkeepers list, maybe Dennis Memmott might be the one that's sort of properly what, but I don't think it's maybe just by default that those other 2 might not be.
I don't think Memmott would even make the top 10. You only have 2 from Falkirk.
There you go. Just stick the pair of them in there, so Memmott doesn't have to go on it. But the defence, you mentioned there that there are question marks over the defence, because I think that Leon McCann is coming back from injury. Cole Donaldson came back from injury against Stennismuir at the weekend there. Tom Lang's out for sort of an indeterminate period of time. But these are guys as well, and this is perhaps something you can maybe say about Falkirk, the wider Falkirk team. There's a lot of guys in there who have all played championship football before, but none of them have really thrived at that level. They've all thrived together by dropping down into League One. I mean, Falkirk were great last season. Falkirk, pound for pound, might have been the best team to watch in Scotland last season. And you just wonder, can they handle the step up en masse into that level? I mean, you and I have spoken about Tom Lang before, and he was one of the best defenders in League One last season. He's a fairly ordinary championship defender.
So when he was at Raith, I would have gladly kept him for another season, but ultimately, if every central defender that Raith had been fit, Tom Lang probably would have been 4th choice. He would have been behind Benedictus, he would have been behind Berra, he would have been behind Frankie Musonda, and none of those guys were fit. So what happened is Lang played for the vast majority of the season. But I like him. I think he's good. I think he can be rash, and I think he can dive into situations 40 yards from goal that he doesn't have to, and then suddenly he's exposed. If he's managed to get that out of his game, then he'll probably have a good season in the championship. In terms of the injuries, I saw quite an interesting interview with John McGuigan maybe about 2 weeks ago, and it was like really honest, like unusually honest, and he was asked about the injuries. And there was always a thing at Raith where there was a suggestion that he didn't always see eye to eye with the medical team.
Okay.
And he was asked about everybody, and he was like, oh, well, Tom Lang, we were having to manage an injury with him last season. He hasn't really quite recovered from that. Cole Donaldson was in the same boat. He talked about, I think it was Finn Yates, had fractured a bone in his foot, but he was further ahead than what they expected him to be. And when they'd looked at the x-ray, there'd been a disagreement with the medical team. And then Callum Morrison, I can't remember what he said about Callum Morrison, but it was just interesting in terms of, so you've mentioned two centre-halves who they managed an injury last season. Now, to be fair, I don't think Tom Lang played from maybe February or beginning of March onwards, but Cole Donaldson played the majority of the games for that final third. Bear in mind, he'd already won the league, and I know he was desperate to go the season unbeaten. Yeah. But see, if you're managing an injury with Cole Donaldson, just don't play him, because you've already won the league.
Yeah.
Then they suggested that there'd been a disagreement with the medical team about Finn Yates, and there is now, potentially, a recurring theme where maybe McGuigan needs to listen to his medical team, and maybe even his players as well, who have to say, listen, got a bit of niggle here. And I suddenly think that can come back to bite McGuigan. I hope it's not the case this season, because I think Falkirk will be a good team to watch again. But I think sometimes McGuigan needs to listen to those around him a wee bit more than he has done in the past.
That's very interesting. Obviously, you'll have a lot more knowledge of what McGuigan's like as a manager, given he was the Rovers manager. I wasn't aware of that perhaps conflict there between him and the medical team. However, if Finn Yates and Tom Lang are missing for whatever reason, the guy called Keelan Adams, who I'd literally never heard of before, when I heard his name getting mentioned, and think, oh, that must be a signing that Falkirk have made that I've completely missed.
I thought that was real.
Or it's a young guy they've promoted from their youth academy that's completely passed me by. However, he was a boy that they signed in January from Cumbernauld Colts. I think he's 22, so he's not, I mean, he's very, very young, but not exactly a spring chicken. He could be one of the breakout stars of the season, because he started playing at right back against Dundee United, gave a very good account of himself, has played at played centre back actually in those games. Nominally a right back, can play in one as well, but has given a really, really good account of himself so far. And if these guys can't make it for whatever reason, you've got a guy there who can step in, play to a high standard. He's fast. He's someone who can run up and down all day, seems to take on his manager's instructions very well, and someone who looks like, I could probably use the expression a couple of times when it comes to Tom Ford, someone who looks like he's enjoying himself, like he's been given this opportunity and is relishing the chance to get to show what he can do. I suppose a similar situation to what we mentioned at Ayr in terms of Watcher. Watcher, that's why he didn't come in from the cold as such, because he was already known to Ayr United fans, and they felt unheralded. Yeah. They felt he maybe should have an opportunity last season, but certainly he has come from essentially nowhere, and I would imagine he will. Bearing in mind, John McGuigan generally has a kind of lengthy injury list. Wherever he goes, I would imagine that there will be plenty of opportunities for him this season. It's Falkirk at their best, though. When you talk about Falkirk, you know exactly how Falkirk are going to play. They're going to play in a 4-2-3-1. But we all know what the best aspect of Falkirk's team is, and that is the striker and the three in behind. You're going to have Ross McKeever as the undisputed number 9, operates a back-to-goal striker, and then you've got these constituent parts in behind. It's probably going to be, if everyone's, I know Calvin Miller's been playing at left-back during pre-season because of McCann's injury, but you've got Miller on one side, Nisbet in the middle, and then Callum Morrison out wide. And then you've got Ross, you've got Alfie Agaman, you've got Gary Oliver that can come in and supplement it. That is a pretty fearsome. I mean, they were outstanding last season. That's a fearsome looking attacking unit. It's very fearsome in League One, but again, you've probably mentioned players who either haven't played at championship level or have, and not necessarily impressed that much. So a big season for a number of them. I'd really interested to see Morrison, because I really do genuinely think he has a talent. However, if he is missing, if he's struggling to, then that's a shame for the start of the campaign. But bear in mind, even in League One, there's been points where I think he started really well, then maybe faded for maybe even 18 months or so. But that last kind of 12 months or 18 months, he's been exceptional for them. 23 goals. The goal, and it might be the goal of the season. I don't know if it did win goal of the season against Montrose in the last minute. Just about to say, horrendous. 35 yards to pick up the ball there when your team are looking to win, because I think that was quite early on into the season when they were neck and neck between themselves and Hamilton Accies. To pick up the ball from there and melt it so accurately right into the top corner, that's an absolute humdinger of a strike. That's incredible, but it filters into what you're saying there. Just someone who was so confident last season and who really would take games by the scruff of the neck. He wasn't the sort of player, because I think previously he was, and this is an expression that came up a lot talking about England during the years, a moments player. You know, where they would come at that. But he was like absolutely dominating games and being really on top. And again, watching them at the weekend there, anytime the ball goes out to Morrison, something's going to happen with it. And yeah, he's played at that level before. I'm right in saying he played with he played with that dog shit Brecon City team who finished with 4 points. That's not an environment where you're going to thrive in and be at your best. But there's a lot of those guys there, like Nizzet's played at that level before. With Morton was so. Aggieman's not played at that level before. McKeever's been there with Partick Thistle, never really got a run of games. So it'll be interesting to see if all these guys, he said earlier, can handle making that a step up en masse. One thing I would point out, I saw on Pine Bovril as I was doing a bit of reading to get a handle, really actually to see what they were saying about Stennismuir. They were not complimentary.
No, they really not complimentary at all.
Stenny at all. But just about Ross McKeever, there's a bit of a debate as to whether or not he was good and whether or not he was good enough to be playing for Falkirk. It went on for days. It was just like they will know Falkirk far better than I do, but I genuinely could not believe there was a debate about what Ross McKeever brings to that Falkirk team. I think that Morrison is their best player, but I do think McKeever's the most important player for how they play, because at that back, he's like, you want to compare him to someone who's back down like Olivier Giroud in that way, where he can play with his back to goal. He might not necessarily be I was going to say sexy, but you know what I mean, like Olivier Giroud is very sexy, but you know what I mean, like the way he plays football might not be the sexiest, but it's so important getting the ball into him and then popping off to these guys, popping off, getting into the box and letting these guys work their magic. I think he's a fantastic player.
I mean, there was one person in particular who doesn't seem to rate McKeever at all on that Falkirk forum. Then at the opposite side of the argument, there was people that was arguing that he was better than Brian Graham. Now, I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. But in terms of I think he will score goals, but there's far more to his game. He can be a bit of a bully. He can hold the ball up, and you're right, he can keep a hold of the ball, and then those players that are behind him can all get up and support. And you're right, he is key to everything that Falkirk do next season. And if he isn't a success, I suspect he will be. If he isn't, then that will blunt them considerably. But I think he'll do fine.
Yeah, I think one player that will be a loss was Stephen McGuigan, who retired at the end of the season. And I know he didn't necessarily play much over the latter part of that campaign. I think he was missing from injuries. But Brad Spencer, I think when he was interviewed, it might have been on the pitch, after they won the league, or certainly after that match with Alloa where they finished the league, and he spoke about how much he brought to the team, and I'm not sure if they've brought in anyone who can replace what Stephen McGuigan did.
I'm surprised you've said. I'm not surprised that Brad Spencer talked them up, but I think, and this sounds like I'm really kind of slagging him off, and I don't mean it, because ultimately he was coming to the end of his career and he was struggling through injury. But I think if he had been if he had a bit more fitness about him last term, then John McGlynn would have played him more, and I don't think Falkirk would have went the season unbeaten.
Right.
Because I just thought he was A, slowing everything down, and B, was struggling with the pace of the game even at League One.
Well, no, what I meant though, the thing you might misunderstood me there was what he brings to the squad, not necessarily from a playing aspect, not necessarily from a playing aspect. That's what I meant. Apologies. That he brings a lot to the team in terms of just his influence and the way he looks after himself and just his personality. And I'm not sure if there's anyone that's coming to replace what they've missed.
I suppose they have Mikey McKenna to talk about conspiracies all around the globe.
Out pamphlets, training. I think as well, like I think they're going to have a good season, Falk. I mean, we're kind of extolling their virtues at length here, and what's already been a very, very, very long point. 4 teams, we discussed 4. We haven't even finished talking about Falkirk, and we're 70 minutes in. This is absolutely absurd. But the thing with you've got a bunch of guys who are all stepping up to the level at the same time. Bit of a lack of freshness there. I think I would say a wee bit stale. It doesn't feel stale actually. Not after you qualify for the League Cup stage, but they could do another couple of a new defender, maybe another striker there. I just think that another criticism as well is that John McGlynn's plan A is very good. Mm-hmm. Is there a plan B?
No, and there never has been. There was a long time ago. It just used to be shove the centre half up front and then play it really long. But certainly, latterly at Starts Park, you always seem to get figured out, and the last third of the season seemed to go much poorly than the first 2/3. Like everybody else seemed to figure them out, and I do think that will that could conceivably hurt Falkirk next season. I think they'll do well. Don't see them challenging for the title. Do see them challenging top 4.
Yeah, I'm going for top 4. I think Falkirk will finish in the top 4.
I think they'll miss out. I'll say 5th.
Right, okay.
Only just though.
Only just. Okay, we will move from Falkirk and we'll go to Inverclyde and we'll talk about Greenock Morton. Now, if we were to draw Greenock Morton's season last time, it looked like a parabola. Where it started very badly and it finished very badly, but by gum, that spell in the middle was really impressive. They went on a 13-game unbeaten run during that middle part of the season, and then Dougie Imrie came on a view from the terrace, and then things were never really quite the same. Yeah, but like they've had a miserable League Cup campaign. I mean, they were thumped 3-0 on East Fife in the opening day. They squeaked past the Highland League side Brechin City. And I think this is going to be a bit of a testing campaign for the Ton.
Yeah, and it almost feels like that they... So we know that they are hindered to a degree by the fact that they're fan-owned. So I do think they have one of the lower budgets in the division. And they very much have to stick to that. There's nobody else going to shove in some money to help them out if they're short at the back or whatever. So they very much have to stick to that budget. I do wonder if Dougie Imrie has maybe bitten off more than he could chew in terms of this summer, in that he is attempting to replace a number of players that were vital to last season, while also, for what I gather, trying to change their style of play. Mm-hmm. That is there's been a turnover of a decent squad, a squad that has done them well in the last season or two. So replacing all of those guys, a lot of key players, and trying to play better style of play seems to be the kind of general consensus. That seems a lot, and I'm not entirely sure. I think he may change his plan. I can see them going a bit more direct than what his plan A seems to be at the moment. Mm-hmm. But I haven't been encouraged by what I've seen so far from them.
Yeah, you lose 3-0 to East Fife in the opening game of the League Cup group stages. That doesn't
fall out with your centre half. I think you told Kurt Broadfoot to fuck off. Is it another tunnel?
You lose your opening game of the League Cup group stages to East Fife 3-0, and then you tell your centre back to fuck off as he gets taken off. Yeah, that's asking for bother. Were you on the episode of Youth the Terrace that Dougie Imrie was on?
Yes, I was.
I remember asking him, and it didn't actually make it into the final episode, but he was talking about people doubting him and people perhaps not believing in him. And I said to him, it sounds like you need that to kick against. You need people to criticise you, and that gives you that fuel. And he said, yeah, I think that's the case. Like I say, it didn't make it into the final episode. But I do wonder if this desire to change the style has come off the back of people being really critical of Morton's style of play last season. Because, I mean, I quite like direct football. I think there's nothing wrong with getting up to the big man and playing off there. It's not the most... there's no right way. What am I trying to say here? There's no right way to play football. There's no wrong way to play football. Like success and getting the best out of the materials that you've got, that's really important. I think that is a sign of a good manager. But they had George Oakley up front, and that was somebody, and whatever Imrie was able to do really brought the best out of him, you know. And I just wonder if those criticisms that stung like, oh, you time waste, it's all about long throws, it's all about just getting the ball into channels and trying to get it a throw in so Lewis Strapp can come over and chuck them in. I do wonder if that hurt him a wee bit, and then he wanted to show that he is actually a good manager, and so that is why he's gone this complete 180 in terms of what he wants to play. And so with guys like Oakley moving on, he's brought all these sort of like diminutive attacking midfielders.
I mean, I'm saying that he's had a clear out and he's tried to change his style of football. He might just think, well, I'm going to have to change my style of play because I don't have Lewis Strapp that can take a long through. I don't have George Oakley that is going to bully defenders and hold the ball up. But the guys that he has brought in, is it Jordan Davies and Lamar Reynolds as the two forwards? I haven't seen or read anything particularly positive in terms of their contribution so far. So no, it very much doesn't seem to be working out, and already it feels like they have a wee bit of a kind of injury crisis as well. Dylan Corr is going to miss a chunk of the season. Certainly, he's getting an operation on his, I think it's his shoulder.
Yeah, that's right.
Managed to injure. So no, it doesn't augur well. And like we've already mentioned, their budget is tight. So I doubt there is a huge scope there to bring in a number of players.
I think that's perhaps the realities of managing Greenock Morton in this current climate is that the money that Douglas Ray was pouring into the club just is no longer there, and I think you can go to the board and ask them, please give me an extra 50 quid to go and sign the striker, and they just do that thing where they're just making concerned faces and rubbing their thumb between I'm trying to describe what it is in a podcast here, where you're rubbing your thumb between your index finger and middle finger. You can maybe hear it. I don't know if you can see. I know you can't see it, but that's what it is. That's what it is. The universal symbol for money. That's what the board are saying every time Dougie Imrie goes to them. So you are working within very strict parameters. Some of the guys that he has signed, I think, are interesting signings. Like Cammy Ballantyne is coming from Airdrieonians. He's just a good fullback. I think you're going to get quite a lot from him. Core, obviously, he's going to be missing for a long time. When he is back playing, what should Morton fans expect from you? You're making a bit of a face there.
I'm in the minority, to be fair, when it comes to Raith Rovers fans, but they seem to make more of Core than I thought. And not because I think he's poor, but he's only 19. And last season or last summer, he went from Celtic B, so playing in the Lowland League, to the Championship. And I thought it was apparent it was making that big leap. Makes a lot of errors. And I just ultimately, I don't think he's ready for the Championship quite yet. But I think he, like Raith have sent Callum Hanna on loan to Montrose, for example. I think if he went to League One, he could probably play 30 league games and do okay and get a bit of experience under his belt. However, when he does come back, if he is to be relied upon as Morton centre-half, I think he'll struggle because he made poor errors. He didn't play a lot of games, again because injury, and actually because I don't think Ian Murray trusted him.
Right.
Bear in mind, he would see him every day on the training ground. But in the handful of games he did play, let's say it was 10, something like that, he probably made a fairly fundamental error in all of them. Some of them he got away with, some of them he didn't, and he's not going to get away with that playing every week. And maybe if he plays every week, by the time he gets to the end of the season, he's not making those errors. But if he needs to come in and hit the ground running when he comes back from injury, I don't think he'll do it.
They've also brought in Aaron Lyle on loan from Rangers. He looked quite good at Airdrieonians. Owen Moffat, I think he was once quite highly thought of at Celtic. He scored a fantastic goal against Ayr Athletic on Saturday.
I thought the keeper could have done more, to be fair. His run was good.
The entire team could have done more, given the fact that he picked up the ball from just the edge of his own half. And perhaps one of the more eye-catching signings in the division was J. Emmanuel Thomas, signed on a 6-month contract. He was previously at Kidderminster Harriers and has also played in Scotland with Livingston and Aberdeen. His time at Livingston, I think there was a period for about 4 or 5 weeks where he might have been the best player in the country.
But the rest of the months that he was there, he was one of the worst players in the country.
Yes.
So not particularly fit.
No, I mean, I think that's why he's been given a 6-month contract, perhaps to prove himself that he has got what it takes to compete in the Championship. I would very much file this in the wait and see.
Aye. See, everybody you mentioned, see in terms of, like, Moffat wasn't particularly great at Dunfermline last season. I like Cammy Ballantyne, but he probably wasn't one of Airdrie's best defenders because they had Megwa, to be fair. But he was good. Aaron Lyle was good at Airdrie, but probably wasn't regarded as necessarily a first choice. So, and I appreciate that Dougie Imrie has a reputation of getting more out of players, I suppose. So there's a chance that all three of those could have good seasons, but they weren't necessarily first picks for decent Championship teams last time around. And J. Emmanuel Thomas, as you say, wait and see. I could see it taking 6 months for him to look sharp enough to make a positive contribution.
And on top of that as well, he occupies a very unique position on the pitch. I'm sure seeing him playing for Aberdeen, he played like as a wide attacker, where he would effectively playing out wide as like in the position a winger would occupy, but holding the ball in. Was obviously a very, very strong player, got a great touch, holding the ball in, and then trying to pop it off to players sort of swarming around them, rather than as an orthodox number 9. And I think, given what you've said there about Lamar Reynolds and Jordan Davis, who will probably need a bit of time to acclimatise to the Championship, the fact that you've brought this guy in to play as a forward when it's not necessarily his best role, who'll also need time to acclimatise to the Championship and get fit, it just sounds a bit like what's happening here?
He could be excellent. He could be Gary O'Connor.
That's not a good
when
comparison.
he signed for Morton. One or t'other.
There are some good players still in the book. So Ryan Mullen, very good young goalkeeper.
Yeah, excellent.
One of the best in the country. He's got a very high ceiling. Ian Wilson, when he's fit, good central midfield. I think he was playing at centre back against Alloa at the weekend just because of various injuries and so on. And Grant Gillespie, since he grew his hair back, he's can work well if he's got the right players around him. So there are like elements for positivity.
Zach Delaney might be a decent sign in for the back four. He might be okay.
He's Lewis Strapp's going to be a big loss. I mean, he's joined. Let's see this. SJK Sinajoki in Finland. You know Stevie Grieve. He's their head coach.
Seems to be doing well, I believe.
Somehow, Lewis Strapp's mum complained that Lewis Strapp wasn't being given the send off he deserved on social media.
And why did she do that again? Like he just left. Like what kind of send off were we expecting?
Parents should just stay off social media. I remember Jack Storer's dad wanted to fight a Gary Caldwell parody account. I mean, it's not that Lewis Strapp's mum's not quite at that level, but nevertheless, the players, Maz and Daz, should just stay off Twitter.
I mean, did she just want a big tweet?
Maybe
saying thanks for your endeavours.
Like a graphic that's effectively just a collage of all Lewis Strapp just
long
standing.
throws.
Lewis Strapp just standing, determined with the ball over his head. Maybe a Morton fan can do that. Dig out the highlights where Lewis Strapp just took loads of long throws.
It'd be a very long supercut if it also included him walking over.
Towards
well, I know Morton fans said it didn't take that long. It really did. It really did take a long time.
Well, that's Finland's problem now. We don't need to worry about that anymore. And it would be astonishing if Morton could reprise that finish they got. They finished in 6th place last season. That would be a huge achievement. And if they do, surely other teams would take a look at Dougie Emery and be like, this guy's capable of doing something special here. Surely he would do something like that, and then other people would realise.
Agreed. The problem is that so you have already described how last season panned out for them. I think they look poorer than the side that they cobbled together last time around, and that means that they are poorer than the team that went about 16 games unbeaten, but they're also poorer than the team that couldn't win at all. I think they're really going to struggle.
I think he could be the thing that holds them together. I do think he could be the thing that holds them together. And I think if they repeat last season's finish, even if they get 7th, it's surely other teams would take a look at him. Do you think? I think so. Yeah, I do. So if I don't think he gets the credit. I honestly don't think, because when we talk about this division, the manager that everyone talks about is the up and coming manager, Rhys McCabe. Not far behind it, it's Ian Murray. Remember, Ian Murray was being interviewed for there was talk of him going for the Dundee job,
and that was strange.
That was strange. That was after
very strange. After a 7th place finish.
A 7th place finish. Whereas when you look at like budget, what he's got to work with, what Emery's got to work with, and what he's been able to get from this. Like even when they beat like Motherwell in the Scottish Cup, that was a game that would have surely attracted a bit more attention.
Yes, you're right. If they could have performances where it's that kind of up and at them, and again punching above their weight, I suppose. But the problem is, if you are having a kind of mediocre campaign where yes, you finish 7th and maybe your budget dictates that is punching above your weight, I don't know if that's necessarily catching the eye of Premiership boards. I'm not so sure. Okay. And I also don't think they'll finish as high as 7th.
Where do you think they'll finish?
I have them bottom.
You got them bottom?
Mm-hmm. Certainly bottom 3, and I think they will struggle to stay up.
Because that's actually probably right, because when I think about this division as a lot of the teams that can get into the top 4, and then when you start working your way down, then that's Morton probably maybe. I think you might be right. Hope not. I don't care. It's a horrible thing to say, but it makes absolutely no difference to me where Greenock Morton finished the table. We'll go on, Shaughan, to talk about Hamilton Academical. After an ignominious relegation into League One, they managed to bounce back to the Championship at the first time of asking. Although they finished some distance behind Falkirk, they were able to negotiate their way through the playoffs. They beat Alloa Athletic, and then they beat Inverness Caledonian Thistle in the final. So, job done. Now, John Rankin, it's fair to say, might not be the most popular manager that Hamilton have ever had, but I think they do look in decent shape for the season ahead. I think they've signed well, they've maintained a good core, and I think when you break down the individual components, you're actually thinking that's actually a pretty decent team that they've got to work with there. I think this could be a good season, and I think that this is why I find it quite difficult. I can see them battling alongside Airdrie and Falkirk to get into that into the top four.
I wouldn't have them at that level.
You wouldn't have them in top four?
No, I think you're right to a degree. I think they've signed quite sensibly. Mm-hmm. I think they've brought in a number of players who have demonstrated already at this level that they are absolutely fine.
Yeah.
The problem is that both of us said that they had quite a good team for League One.
No, they did. They ultimately was too good a team for League One because they got promoted from it.
Yes, but do you think that they got promoted because of John Rankin or in spite of him? Like, do you think that he got the best out of that bunch of players? Because I don't think he did. I think they had a good squad and they got promoted. And okay, you're right. That is absolutely a job done. I think they should have been a wee bit closer to Falkirk than they were. And I think although they have an okay squad for the championship, that they will be. I don't think John Rankin is the man for them.
Right, okay, well, we'll talk about John Rankin in the first instance. What is it about Rankin that you think people don't like? I mean, my own thoughts are with Rankin, there's like substitutions is the big
That's
thing.
the main one.
Game management is something. Like having been at the match where they beat Alloa to get into the playoff final last season, they're playing against 10 men for the entire second half, and Alloa, there were points where you wouldn't have known there was much between them, and it was only till very late on where he did make those changes, where Akeem Rose came on and ultimately scored the winning goal for them. It was a frustrating watch because, you mean, even as a dum-dum like myself, a fucking yank here sitting here, even as a dummy, that's even as a jobber like myself, I could see that what needed to be changed. I just don't think he was able to adapt to it quickly enough. And there'll be Hamilton fans that are watching that. I've certainly had 2 seasons of that, and I'm just perhaps a bit fed up of it.
Agreed. You're right. So substitutions, game management, and as much as the incomings, the players that have come in, I think they're quite sensible. I still think that there is elements of this team where I'm not 100% certain are up to challenging in the kind of upper echelons, I suppose, of the championship. Maybe the middle of the park. Mm-hmm. More so, like I like Scott Martin, to be fair.
Yeah.
And has done well at the championship. Jamie Barjonas, I'm not sure. Barry Maguire, I think, has been brought in to maybe play as a kind of defensive role in the middle of the park. Not sure about him either. I think that could be their undoing.
I think that I really like Scott Martin as well. I think Scott Martin's a smashing player, and every time that I've seen Hamilton, it's always been like, how come you're not playing a bit further up? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm not saying I watch him every week, but every time I see him, when they're doing good stuff, he's always involved with it. I think Maguire is a very, very fit boy, very strong boy, and someone who will just be expected to just protect that defence, run around, clatter into people, get the ball back and give it to guys like Martin and Barjonas. Barjonas had that outstanding seasons at Kelty Hearts, where he really helped establish the club in the SPFL and then ultimately in League One. And I think he earned his move back into full-time football. But I think I've not really seen enough of him at Hamilton. But I do think that Martin and Maguire are good, providing that you find a very specific role for Maguire to fulfil.
And maybe, like, I think Stephen Henry is still starting games at left back. Not so sure about that. And to be fair, I'm very much dwelling on negatives here. And I think maybe the last one is goalkeeper. I think in Ryan Fulton there, a very good goalkeeper.
Didn't play him over the bar.
I know, very strange. Went to Hearts. Ayr fans spoke very highly about Charlie Albinson. Again, I've mentioned the fact that sometimes Ayr fans seem unusually positive about some of the players. I thought he was okay, but latterly Ayr United struggled or flattered to deceive. I'm not entirely sure he is a great option for the championship.
They still have Dean Linus in their books. He did fine when he came and replaced Jamie Smith. Jamie Smith's away to Annan Athletic, which I thought was
surprised.
Great move for Annan, but I thought that Smith might have been playing further up the food chain. Yeah, I think these guys are like Albinson. I think Albinson's a fine goalkeeper. Sometimes prone to a bit of a clangor, but they've also, again, what we mentioned, we talked about Ayr United, like Sean McGinty's come in. bit of a maligned finger. A maligned finger. A maligned finger.
I honestly think he's underrated. He cannot play football. So you're right. He was never going to be any good for Scott Brown. And watching him, like there was points last season watching him like play against Raith. Anytime the ball come near him, it was just kick it as hard as you can. I mean, it was sometimes painful to watch. However, see if you just want him to win a ball and kick it as hard as he can, he's ideal.
That's just like you've read my notes here. What I've got here. Sean McGuinty is a maligned finger. I've done it again. I've got Sean McGuinty is a maligned figure, and Lord knows I've maligned him plenty of times myself. However, he can be a decent stopper, so long as he doesn't have to do anything positive with a footballer.
He's just adequate.
Just give it along to someone, of course. And I think that alongside like Dylan McGowan and Lee Kildare, there's makings of a strong partnership there. I saw a photograph though. McGowan looks like he'd be some time away from kicking a ball. He was on crutches and he had a knee strap, like one of those Stone Cold Steve Austin style knee braces. So I think he's a fair bit away.
And I think, is it Fergus Owens who there was like a positive chat about him in terms of how like young player that how he might do at centre half, but I think he might miss, if not all, then a massive chunk of this season as well. So
that's a shame.
That's not ideal for them.
There's also Cian Newbury, who was a standout for Dumbarton last season. He came in for the last 6 months, and he can play in central defence. He can also play in central midfield. I think ultimately that's where Dumbarton ended up playing him as part of that double pivot alongside Finlay Gray. If Hamilton want to send him out on loan again, there'll be a queue of sides looking for him, particularly Dumbarton. I think Dumbarton are probably in the market for another centre back. There's also, in the terms of the midfield, we've got Ben Williamson in there. I know a player who you really liked from his time at Raith Rovers.
No, I thought he struggled at starts back. A player who's ultimately his career seems to be the kind of arrow appears to be kind of pointing down. Like I know he impressed on loan at Arbroath. He was, I suppose, okay at Dundee. Wasn't great at Starts Park. Wasn't great at Partick Thistle. Hasn't done very much at Hamilton. I don't think Hamilton fans are overly enamoured at him, and it does feel like that he is slipping down the full-time teams, I suppose.
Well, at least if you do want to be positive about Hamilton, they have an array of attacking options, and this is perhaps where the greatest strength in their team lies. Perhaps the most intriguing signing that they've made is Ollie Shaw, who's coming from Barnsley. He was on loan at Motherwell last season. I was going to say quite underwhelming, but if you want to say bad, that's up to you. I'm sure. I can't remember who it was against. It might have been against Hibs.
Was it maybe one of the last games of the season?
Yeah, it was like 98th minute or something, and he flopped a big chance. Yeah, and it's strange that somebody who Leanne Dempster described as one of the best young attackers in Europe missed a chance like that. But I remember seeing him. Hibs loaned him out to Steny. And I remember thinking, this guy is really good, because ultimately it's what you want from all loans. You want to see the player leave in better condition than they were when they arrived. And I really think that he developed. He was quite rangy, quite a difficult player to get to grips with. Also a pretty good finisher. And I think that he developed into a sort of like fox in the box kind of striker with good movement. And I think that if there's a bit less pressure playing on him, because maybe I think that's the sort of thing that he struggled with. He actually said when he moved to Ross County that Leanne Dempster calling him like one of the best young attackers in Europe was ultimately detrimental to him. So if he can play a bit less pressure on him, I think he could.
I'm laughing at you, but I'm just thinking to myself, like, how many young players, like at the time, so how many young players would have been, and how many young forwards, for example, maybe, I don't know,
Kylian Mbappe,
8,000 at a time, like, who would have been on that list? However, like, I'm certainly not laughing in terms of his ability at this level, because actually I still wanted Raith to sign him.
Yeah.
And I know if you're a Kilmarnock fan, if you're Craig Anderson or Scott McClymont listening to this, you may, I don't know, guffaw perhaps, but considering how good he was, like, he was decent at this level for Kilmarnock. And I think that I think he will genuinely have a decent season. You saw his finish for, I'm trying to think it was against Ross County. Like his touch and his kind of spin and his finishing at the bottom corner was really impressive. And I think that is what he can do when A, he has a bit of confidence about him, and B, when he's playing against opponents that aren't as good.
Yeah.
And the championship, that's what he's going to be up against week in, week out, and I think he'll be good.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that he played for Kilmarnock. I remember that now, and at the time thinking, wow, that's actually a really good signing for Kilmarnock. That's a bit of a coup, and unfortunately it didn't work out for either party. But who knows, that John Rankin might be able to use that expression, unlock something that Derek McInnes or Tommy Wright couldn't.
But in terms of if you've got Ollie Shaw, and I know Kevin O'Hara has been hot and cold at this level, Stephen Bradley, for example, on the other side, I think that's a trio of players who can give anybody in this league a difficult afternoon.
Yeah, on top of that as well, we've got Darrow O'Connor, who's coming from Glentoran, and I think he looked okay in flashes during his spell at Ayr United.
Didn't get very many opportunities, and it was weird because he would come off the bench, like basically his entire time at Ayr was he would be sat on the bench, they would struggle and desperately need something up front. He would come on, provide a spark, maybe score a goal, or an assist, start the next week, and then be terrible.
Yeah,
and then just repeat for his entire Ayr career.
He was quite prolific at Glentoran last season. I think he got 1 and 3 for his goal return, which is pretty good. And then there's guys like Ewan Henderson is there, O'Hara you've mentioned, and you got Nikolai Todorov, who's coming from Airdrieonians.
Strange that I found that unusual,
very unexpected. I think he was let go from Airdrieonians, and I think within 24 hours he's pitched up at Hamilton.
I suppose what you don't want to do is if you have a close relationship with a football agency and all of your players are at that agency, if one wants to move, then you probably don't want to rock the boat, because I believe Todorov was with Concilium as well. So I suppose it makes sense to release him and allow him to go wherever he wants to go. But I do think that he is potentially going to be in the same situation as he was last season, where he will start a number of games and be on the bench for a number of games. So I don't know if it's necessarily a great move for him, unless it's more money, I suppose.
It's 2-year contract as well that he signed.
So
I think it's a useful option that he's got there as well. I mean, they've got a very large squad as well, Hamilton. If Wikipedia is anything to go by, 29 first team players. Now I'm going to assume that is going to be significantly cut down over the next season.
The weird thing is that's them already. Like they've already, I think, in terms of outgoings compared to guys coming in, I think they maybe have about 5 or 6 fewer players now than they did. I mean, it was a massive squad last season, but you're right, it feels like it needs pruned a wee bit.
So you're going to assume that some of these guys are going to be sent out on loan, and that's going to have a knock-on effect for the teams further down the food chain. Newbury is one that we mentioned. If he can't get a game, teams will be queuing up to sign him. On top of that, they're charging £26.
Outrageous.
£6 increase from last season. That's above inflation. That, to me, that seems like a ludicrous amount of money for mid-card championship football.
And I know that there is, like East Fife. Remember when East Fife, like they kept the prices from League One to League Two,
£18,
and I suppose the rationale at the time, and I understand it, was that it doesn't really matter what we charge. We're essentially going to get the same attendances every week. We can drop it by £5. And we still won't get anybody new in the door. So what is the point of charging less? Okay, short term, I kind of understand that argument, but long term, you're not really getting anybody in addition through the door. So, that is extortionate.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And on top of that as well, they've got the worst fucking kits in the country. Holy fuck.
But they have tweaked it. So they've changed it. Have you seen it?
Oh, no, because I saw it when it was basically just like red shoulder pads, and there was like 2 white stripes.
Right, so it's now, so it's
2
now
white
different.
hoops, beg your pardon.
So what they've said, bear in mind they had a release, an official release of their strip. And it was like everybody was very negative. I mean, and rightly so. Very, very negative in terms of the feedback about it. They then had a Q&A session, maybe about 3 or 4 days afterwards, and whoever from the board was there said, "Well, actually, that's not a finished article." I said, "Well, you've just released it. You've just had a massive release of the strip. Surely it's a finished article." But no, they have tweaked it. So now there is a third. So rather than being this huge band of red at the top, there is an additional. So it's now 3 white stripes.
Yeah, it's a bit more
it's
palatable.
Still bad, but not as awful as it initially was.
Right. I mean, it's made by a company called Kurt. That's a manufacturer I have never heard of before. It looks like a knockoff brand you'd see in EastEnders.
I think it's Turkish.
Right.
I think because of their owner's Turkish, so I believe it might be a Turkish company. Yes.
Okay.
Because it's Turkish for wolf.
Right, is it? There you go. I haven't used Google Translate. That's part of my ignorance there. But it just looks like a cartoon big cat scratch. Like, you'd see something like that where it's gone along the front of the shirt.
I suppose my concern is, was there not a situation at the Euros where somebody from Turkey was banned for making the wolf gesture because it's a big kind of right wing thing.
Apparently so, yeah. He could also be doing the too sweet from like WCW as well. That should have been his defence. I'll just paying tribute to Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. That's what it was.
If only knew more about wrestling.
So Accies, I have got them a challenging for the top 4 here.
Oh, I will have them 9th.
Rankin, say for instance, like I know that the fans, if Rankin isn't doing well, like fans will be quick to let him know. You know, that's.
I don't think there's a lot of credit in the bank. As much as they got him promoted, that was the bare minimum that he could have achieved last season. I mean, at points, even though they were sitting saying, even I think there was points where they weren't that far behind Falkirk, and fans were very critical of what he was doing. So no, as much as he has the promotion, which was job done, I don't think there's a lot of credit in the bank. And if the season starts poorly, then I would imagine. Actually, no, because he got a contract extension.
Did he?
And I'm sure he got a contract extension even when they weren't doing particularly well last season. So I think he could be there for the foreseeable, which again just means that there will be a really toxic, maybe a bit extreme, a bad atmosphere like, at the stadium.
Like we say, they are not shy in letting Rankin know if things are going bad. And on top of that as well, there are a number of clubs in Scottish football that are going through a particularly bad time off the pitch. We're going to come on and talk about them the further we get into this podcast, but it just feels like there's something daft. It's just on the horizon. Just as always with Hamilton Accies, there's something just like burning away. Never far away from them. Never far away. I mean, at least we've managed to get to the Twitter account sorted, where one is that there's the official Twitter account, and then we've got the one that previously was the official Twitter account. It's now basically Hamilton Accies news, stats and info.
So that's the unofficial one, because I was looking at the other day and I'm like, right, so this, I'm presuming this now isn't the official one. It's an unusual title if it was an official one.
As that's very much become Scott Struthers. That's his fan account.
And is there much, because I follow both, but now I'm trying to think, is there that much coming from the official one?
I will certainly be, I think because there was so much that was coming from Scott Struthers one, it perhaps makes the official one look particularly quiet. But in comparison, but then I think the official one's doing what normal clubs do. There's so much coming from that one. The man just lives and breathes Hamilton Accies. Fair play to him. But just some of the that's how I knew that Dylan McGuigan was wearing a Stone Cold Steve Austin knee brace, because it was coming from the Accies one. Now, Accies are a club where nonsense is never far from the surface. Let's talk about another club where some kind of nonsense, or perhaps more kind of like a sort of like EastEnders hardman kind of nonsense. This is Livingston Football Club, and after 6 years in the Premiership, Livingston were relegated into the Championship, and they'd always seemed to punch above their weight during that time in the top tier, but not last season. They were pretty much rotten for the most part of it. David Martindale spending any time a microphone was shoved in front of his face, complaining about money. Like some ex-wife complaining about lack of alimony payments from her deadbeat ex. And that was born out of a really kind of confused and addled squad that didn't look competitive for the level it was at, and ultimately they ended 10 points behind Ross County. Martindale will continue as manager, and there's been an enormous turnover of players. 12 players in, 17 players out, and I've got down for Livingston. Livingston could win the division. They could also finish in 9th place. I'm really not sure what to expect. They did look very handy in their League Cup group stages. They won the first 3 matches without conceding a goal. Then they got out and lost to the bloody Spartans in the 86th minute. So I really don't know what to expect for this mob.
I don't think there's any other team in Scotland, never mind the lower leagues, that would, across one summer, have players leave their club and join teams called Carmio Lisa, Wuxi Wugu, and Kangju Mighty Lions. Oh, and Chippa United. Like, nobody else can do that in Scottish football. And you're right, they could win the league. They could lose the relegation playoffs or the League One playoffs. I will go more towards the former. So I am surprised at how many decent players have kind of stuck around. I think they already had as much as they struggled last season, I think they have their core. They already had the core of a good championship team. They've brought in a huge amount of players. Some of them are known to us, but have done okay at this level before, and done well in some examples. And when you think about that, right, so at a core of a good team, one or two others that I think will probably do well, and then about 10 that we've never heard of. Now, surely, even if David Martindale has a success rate of 30% from these 10 unknown players, that leaves you with a fairly good starting 11. So I think as long as David Martindale, because remember we discussed Livingston on the TV show, I think it made the kind of final cut, and we spoke about what to expect of Livingston. Is it, well, will David Martindale be the best manager in the championship?
I remember
or
that.
Is it that they should just get rid of him and bring in somebody with new ideas, kind of clean, kind of fresh broom or whatever the saying is? If he still has the respect and the buy-in from that squad, I expect Livingston to do very, very well.
Always feels like a moot point though. It feels like there's no other club in Scotland where the manager is so completely ingrained with the fabric of it than David Martindale. So that's why I think discussions about him moving on elsewhere, if he moves on elsewhere, it'll be his own volition. I don't think there's going to be anyone above him that's going to have a word with him or encourage him. He'll move on his own volition. It's a strange set of circumstances. But I do agree with your point there that on paper, similar to Hamilton, there's a good core of players here that I think can have a positive impact in the division. I mean, the first signing that they brought in was Robbie Muirhead from Greenock Morton, and Muirhead perhaps never quite lived up to his early promise at the likes of like Dundee United and Kilmarnock and Heart and Midlothian. But that 2 years that he had at Morton, that was the most prolific of his career.
I think he got about 17 goals last season.
29 goals in his 2 seasons there. So he's definitely going to add something to the front line. He's already scored in the League Cup group stage. He scored a really nice goal against Dunfermline Athletic, and that was created by Stephen Kelly. Now, Kelly, I think on paper is the best player in that division already. Yeah, I do think he's the best player in that division. Whether or not he is there come the end of the transfer, and there's another story, because I do think he's a player that Livingston could make a bit of money off. But if you've got somebody like Muirhead making those runs, you've got like Teti Yengi up front playing alongside him, those front three players, they could really cause other teams a bit of damage.
I was just going to say, like Scott Pittman behind them, like we know he's like a very good player. Ollie Green, who they've brought in,
supposed to be really good, getting good write-ups really well. Coming from Hull City, and like Jamie Brandon, like playing at right back, he's the captain. Like he feels
fine.
Like he is fine. I think he's good. Ryan McGuigan's a good signing.
Seems like a really decent acquisition at centre half. So in terms of everything they've done so far, you're right. In terms of the most recent League Cup result against Spartans was very disappointing. On another day, as far as I'm aware, they could have won it quite handsomely. The rest of the results have been quite kind of straightforward. Haven't really blown anybody away. But up until the Spartans game, they kept 3 clean sheets.
Yeah.
So no, I have been impressed by them so far.
Yeah, definitely. I think that Ryan McGuigan is just like generally a very good signing. I think he's the sort of guy, it's a bit of a cliche, but he's the guy that's good to have around the place. You know, he's the sort of guy that can cover a number of positions, somebody who has been around long enough that he's experienced. I do think he'll offer something really good. The other players that I was going to talk about in terms of their signings, like Andy Winter and Lewis Smith, have both come in from Hamilton Accies.
I think Smith's a good signing. Andy Winter, I'm not too sure about.
Smith, and I think it's a point that Fowler made in previous podcasts. Like Lewis Smith, if he was called, he took his mum's name, was it Lewis Garavelli?
Yeah.
He'd have been playing for like Torino or something like that, some far-flung team out in the continent. But the fact he's just plain old Lewis Smith, there must be thousands of Lewis Smiths out there that perhaps he never quite kicked on to his career. And I think that him moving on, the pair of them moving on, actually, they might have got up quite stale at Hamilton, and so a change will do them good. I agree with you about Andy Winter, though. I don't think he really pulled up any trees last season. But then we've said the same, like guys like Shaughan Kelly, who I think he signed from Falkirk when they were in League One, who went on to be quite a useful player for them. So maybe it's the same thing, where you're signing guys maybe a wee bit extra money that they're getting that they're perhaps not getting at Hamilton, and maybe you can use that alchemy that he's been known for in the past that can turn these two guys into something more tangible.
Yeah, they are my early season favourites. I have them as winners.
You've got them for winners. You need to do a wee bit more convincing, Shaughan. I
mean, I've already pointed out that they potentially have the best manager in the division. If he still has the ear of the players within there, they have the kind of rump of a team that probably half a dozen, arguably, that is our top end, I think, championship players. They've brought in guys like, I appreciate that Muirhead isn't everybody's cup of tea. However, he scored, I think, 17 goals.
I think he believes in UFOs.
That doesn't make him a bad person.
No, that doesn't. I suppose there's conspiracy theories. UFOs are perhaps a more palatable one.
There must be something out there, surely, to goodness. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a UFO enthusiast. I wouldn't be surprised if there was aliens out there somewhere.
Imagine if Fox Mulder was on social media. God, he'd be insufferable.
And they've brought in a number of players who I've never heard of, but surely some of them will be good. That alone gives you a good starting 11.
So it's the idea of you throwing a shit against the wall, something's going to stick.
I think in terms of, I think they have the best starting 11 in the division. Okay, and in terms of a squad, that will be reliant on some of these other unknown quantities being quite good. So maybe that's what will cost them. But in terms of if everybody's fit, I think they have the best starting 11 in the Championship.
I can see where you're coming from. The only thing it's a concern that I've put down here is that I wonder if Martindale's reached the end of his shelf life.
Potentially,
now, we know that's a moot point. We've just discussed that. If he leaves Livingston, it'll be from his own volition. But there was a period when Livingston got promoted into the top flight, and I know that that was effectively under Hopkin, and Hopkin on. Remember Kenny Miller was a Livingston manager for you, but Martindale was always this figure in the background. And when he first came to prominence, he was such a vibrant and exciting character. You're always really interested to hear from him, and on top of that, he's got a really, really interesting story. But latterly, he just seems like quite browbeaten and irritable and not much fun. And as mentioned at the top there, any time a microphone is pointed in front of his face, he's complaining about money, and it just became really, really tiresome to listen to. And I think that his personality is reflected a lot in Livingston, and I think when it's good, Livingston were good to watch. Remember when they beat like Celtic at, when Lyndon Dykes scored against them? That's a lot of fun. But then when they're going down, he was moody. And obviously I know that the fact that your team's losing every week and your job's at stake, that's not going to be much fun to be around. But he seemed moody, and Livingston seemed moody. They were probably one of the worst sides to watch in Scotland last season, and I do hope that he can rediscover his mojo, because he's class. We had him in a View for the Terrace. He's great guy to be around. You could see yourself going for a pint with him and just wanting to listen to all the stuff that he's got to talk about. I do think he is a force for good in Scottish football. I think he's not just Scottish football, I think Scottish society as well. Someone who can admit that he's done wrong, like look back at your past and learn from your mistakes, and then ultimately try to encourage other people not to go down the same route that you did and find solutions and going down different ways. So I really like the guy and do hope he can rediscover his mojo, because I think that's good for Livingston. I
think you're spot on, and I think if Livingston start the season well, continue into September, for example, that will have a transformative effect on him in general, and I would imagine that Livingston would kick on. So yes, I think if he can still do the things that we know he can, then I think Livingston will win the league. But that, I think Martindale and what he has left maybe to give is key to how Livy do this season.
I think there's some issues as well, and this is a lot of good stuff there on the park. This is off the park though. Issues about the long-term future of the club. I think the ownership of Livingston is...
But there always is.
Yeah.
Like there always is. Like what's changed?
Like the word I've put down here, perhaps the most milquetoast word I could use, opaque. And I think there's been issues. I was trying to read up on it, but there's been issues about like the ownership, the accounts are perhaps up to date. I'm not sure if they've been addressed. There's an upcoming court case. The club are running out huge losses. All this sort of stuff.
Are you talking about 2024 or 2003 or... I mean, ultimately, all of this is going to affect their budget, and I would imagine that this is their biggest and best opportunity to get back into the top flight. I think if they don't manage it this season, I think they'll be in a wee bit of bother, because they won't have... Is it just one season of parachute payments from the Premiership, or maybe the parachute payment is slightly less in the second season? Right. Not sure. This is their biggest opportunity to, and I think they have a European solidarity payment as well that they
really.
Yeah, so because you're in the Premiership, they receive whatever it is, some kind of European solidarity. So it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So this is their best opportunity to get back to top flight. I think if they don't manage it, then they will be just kind of grubbing around the lower leagues for a long time to come. But I suspect that they will manage it.
No, that's right. Actually, that's a good point when you're talking about like opportunity for teams, because as we said right at the very start, there are no big sides in the Championship, so every team would be looking to it. Yeah, I'd have, actually, weirdly, when I was thinking at my top four, I actually didn't put Livingston in there. But then I'm thinking, if they're not in the top four, where are they going? Because you've got Hamilton Accies and Airdrie challenging, so Livingston 7th? I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. Yeah, I think that they can. I'm going from sticking to it. I think it's anywhere between like league winners and 9th.
And that's fair enough. I mean, you really have covered almost. Like that's not fair enough. Now I think about it. You've covered too many bases.
I think they can finish anywhere between 1st place and 9th place. That's it.
I think they can finish. I think they can finish in the Championship.
Imagine they get relegated, finish bottom, get relegated. My prediction's terrible, absolutely terrible. Shaughan, we are almost 2 hours into this podcast, and we still have 3 teams left in the Championship to talk about. Fucking hell, it's like that. The whole thing about doing these podcasts is you give every team a place. You don't want to skimp over anyone and just and treat them all the same degree of respect. And if you want to do that, you're going to have to take your time to do it. I thought, and the worry is, like, when people saw a 6-hour podcast, there would be stuff like, oh fucking hell, that's long. But it was long for a reason.
Wait till they see a 7-hour podcast.
Well, we won't be seeing one this year, because I think this one's going to be longer than that. Oh my goodness, we just can't help ourselves. Shaughan and I just can't help ourselves. But Shaughan, we've spoken about Livingston. We will go and talk about Partick Thistle. And I thought last season, on the whole, was a pretty impressive one for Thistle. If you remember when they were beaten by Ross County in the playoff final on penalties, the next day, the very next day, the club published a statement saying they were going to be experiencing financial difficulties. And I think the day after that, a number of players signalled that they'd be heading off elsewhere. Rumours of demise, however, were greatly exaggerated, and Thistle spent 3/4 of the season in 3rd place. They did just fall short in the playoffs, losing out to Raith Rovers and penalties in the semis, but once again, I think they look in good shape for another assault for promotion. Kept hold of most of the better players. I think Jack McMillan's the only departure that you'd be really sorry to see the back of.
Yes, the only other one is that I think they had a backup forward who was quite happy to be a backup forward in terms of Tommy Adeloy. Like, he seemed to be okay in terms of sitting on the bench and then coming off and coming on and doing whatever he had to do. That, I suppose, is a position that might still need filled. But that aside, I think Partick fans should be very satisfied at the very least with their summer business.
Like, I mean, their first signing, or certainly one of the first signings they made, I was like, I think it's the best signing any team is going to make in the Championship this summer. Who am I talking about?
Logan Chalmers?
I was going to say Kyle Turner.
Kyle Turner's an excellent signing.
Kyle Turner, I think that we all know what Kyle Turner will bring to the team. He is very much the Darren Huckerby of the Scottish lower leagues, where he's perhaps not quite good enough for the top flight, but he's an excellent Championship player. And you can see, I mean, you'll see what he brought to once he cut his hair. What he got up to speed.
He was really poor until he got his hair cut. As if there was another Kyle Turner. As if he signed the wrong Kyle Turner for a bit.
But I mean, he can do a bit of everything. I mean, he's fit, he's dynamic, he's a live wire. He can pass the ball, he can chip in with the odd goal. He's a wee gobshite as well, and I think that's what fans quite like about him. I think he's a sort of player that you hate when he isn't in your team, but when he's on your team, you really want to see him.
So see, as much as see if he'd been allowed to play in that playoff final. I mean, I don't think for a minute that would have been enough for Raith Rovers to sneak past Ross County in any shape, way or form. However, him not being in the Raith team made them significantly weaker, and that was one of the reasons why I was hoping that on the last day St Johnstone would have been a team that finished 11th, because the player that we wouldn't have been allowed to use was James Brown. Unfortunately, we were used to allowed to use him, but couldn't use Turner. But no, excellent. And I didn't expect him to come back. I did wonder if from another Premiership team might come in from. But you're right, he probably isn't quite good enough. But he's just excellent at the Championship level, and he immediately improves that Partick Thistle team.
Yeah, great set pieces as well.
Yep.
And on top of that, you have got best striker in the division as well.
And then shows no sign of slowing down.
I was looking at his numbers. We're talking about Brian Graham here, obviously. The captain, he scored, and we're recording this on this Sunday. I think it's already kicked off as Motherwell versus Partick Thistle. So I'm not sure what the outcome for that game means. I don't think it really matters anyway. But nevertheless, Brian Graham scored in the 3 games so far. He got 26 goals last season, 21 the year before. So this season, going by that, we're looking at more than 30. I mean, he's already got 3 and 3 already. an outstanding centre forward. Just gets better with age. Experienced. I'm just going to give you words here that like similar to Kyle Turner. I'm just going to go through some adjectives. Experienced, strong, intelligent. Like, it must be an absolute nightmare to play against. Like, he bullies defenders. Single digit body fat as well. The guy's built like that. I'm holding my pinky up if nobody can see it. And I would say as well, like, it must be a brilliant example to young players around the club to see what if you stay fit and you look after yourself and you eat right and make the right decisions, this is the kind of career you can have. Like, look how long you can play for. And on top of that as well, one of the best guests we've had on a View for the Terrace. I thought he was just a great guy to sit and listen to and to chat to.
Yeah, he was excellent. So, I mean, an excellent performer, an excellent goal scorer. You feel he's probably a brilliant leader in the dressing room and on the park. And in terms of
score all types of different goals as well.
And he's not just like I always felt. I think we've spoken about him in the past, a long time ago probably. But we felt maybe he was a goal scorer rather than anything else. I think he can bring in all the players round about him. And you think of the players, so players that they already had at the club. So like Aidan Fitzpatrick, for example, playing off him. They've brought in Logan Chalmers, who I know it felt like Scott Brown didn't necessarily fancy him, but certainly on his day. And he needs to have more days when he's on it.
Yeah.
One of the better players in the Championship. Stephen Lawless, I know, is injured, but when he comes back, there's another brilliant option that they have behind. They've supplemented the rest of that midfield with Turner, Macbeth. Felt like a really good signing from was it West of Scotland League? Glenafton. So no, in terms of from the middle going forward, there's no many teams in the Championship that's better than that.
I think that what you made about Adloy, that's a difficult thing, and it'll be the same for Partick Thistle, probably same for Falkirk as well. When you play like a 4-2-3-1 and your best player, your most important player is your striker, very difficult to let other players get a shot. And I think it's probably how it's for Rico Diak, however you pronounce it. I mean, his dad used to play for Steny, Ian Diak, and that makes me feel really old. So I don't know if it's Ian Diak. If you know how to pronounce Rico's surname, please do get in touch. I'll call him Diak for the time being. But I think there's quite high hopes for him. And Partick Thistle, Chris Doolan must be in a difficult position because you want to give this guy's young boy as much football as possible so he can get experience. But how do you do that when he shares the same position as your captain?
And you would imagine that right now, Chris Doolan doesn't want him as his second striker. He'll want to bring in somebody else who has more experience at the very least. So he'll be eager to give Diak game time, but probably doesn't want him to be the backup to Brian Graham. So you're right. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a difficult circle to try and square, because the sensible thing would be to loan him out somewhere else. But then you still, because you don't have that other striker, he is the backup at the moment, so you kind of have to keep him. So it'll be interesting to see what his future holds. One of the other players, Shaughan, you mentioned guys like Aidan Fitzpatrick, really exciting attacking player. Stephen Lawless being very good. Again, Stephen Lawless, certainly latterly, perhaps at the Championship's his level. Don't think he's quite mobile enough to or strong enough to play in the top flight. They've also brought, and this will be a recurring series in this podcast, players with points to prove after a series of underwhelming loan spells. Dan Mackay, another player's coming from Hibernian.
Maybe
showed a lot of promise when he broke through at Inverness in the first instance, and that ultimately what led him to get his move at Hibs, but never really settled at Easter Road, and then subsequent loan spells elsewhere. It's at Livingston.
I suppose there are comparisons there to Dylan Tate in terms of impressed, went to Hibs, then had to go out and get experience on loan. The thing is, though,
Dylan Tate had a cracking season with Falkirk last year. I think that Mackay
has never really quite done it yet. So this is a massive season for him.
Yeah, and it's a big season as well. It feels like a big season for Logan Chalmers. We touched on him there. Someone who is undoubtedly talented, and when you watch him play, when he's on it, he's really fun to watch. Just like taking the piss out of players, just dribbling his close control, capable of doing spectacular things. But I think I always get the impression he drifts out of matches a lot of the time, like where you want to really see him like dominate games rather than just decorate them.
A total cliche, but in terms of somebody who is going to roll up their sleeves and get wired in when, I don't know, when they're struggling, or if your back's against the wall, he is not necessarily the player that you want. But that's fine, because if you can give him if you can allow him on the leash and not necessarily give him any kind of defensive responsibility whatsoever, then he will probably score a goal and set one up, and then you win the game 2-1 or 3-2 or something. So absolutely fine. And just as a fan, like somebody you want to watch, not necessarily when you're playing Partick Thistle. I mean, I think it was a 4-4 game at Starks Park, and he was on the bench, and I was like, well, that's fine, thank goodness for that. I can't remember what happened. It might have, I'm sure he came on early, maybe in the first half, but certainly as soon as he came on, game changed, and Raith struggled against him. He was absolutely excellent. So there was rumours that Raith were in for him as well, but was quite disappointed when Partick got him. Yeah,
certainly, and you might accuse him of not rolling his sleeves up all the time. Two players who certainly do roll their sleeves up, and I do think this is going to be really big seasons for the pair of them. Ben Stanway, Luke Macbeth. We'll start with Macbeth first because we've spoken about him already. Must be one of the finds of the season last year, who had been playing football in the United States before returning to Scotland. He played in the Lowland League with East Kilbride, West of Scotland League with Glenafton, but I remember, like, I just when I saw the name, I thought he was like a player like similar to Stanway, like a player from the academy. But then seeing the size of him, like, you ever the episode of The Simpsons with Lurleen Lumpkin? Do you know the episode I'm talking about?
No. You're not talking to Craig Fowler here.
I wish I was talking to Craig Fowler because he would get this reference and find it funny.
I mean, he's through there. Something just wheel him through for the Simpsons reference.
There's an episode where there's a character called Big Shirtless Rod. That's just who Luke Macbeth reminds me of. There might be someone a Partick Thistle fan, who's seen that particular episode of The Simpsons that knows what I'm talking about. But I think that's the kind of players where he is just big, strong, like an enforcer in the middle of the park. But that sounds like you're doing him a disservice. But remember the goal that he scored against Airdrieonians in the playoffs, which was an absolute stunner, just picking the ball up in the middle of the park, melting the thing, so much power, so much accuracy, right into the top corner. And he subsequently has signed a new contract up until June 2027. Can probably play in central defence as well, given the size.
I don't think it was a hindrance to him last season, but he kind of flipped between the two, wherever he was most needed, I suppose, centre half or middle of the park. I think the way kind of signings that they brought in, the squad that they have, I expect them to play further forward. I think he will be, and he's not just an enforcer. You're right, he can do so much more than that, and I think he will make the kind of middle of the park a position his own, and I expect them to do very well.
I think as well that length of contract up until June 2027, I think they perhaps know that other teams might have an eye on him. It's great, love seeing that. See guys that are completely like unheralded, these uncut gems and I don't know if it's because it's more acutely felt at Partick Thistle because of guys like Chris Doolan coming from Auchinleck Talbot and is it Chris Erskine coming from Kilbirnie Ladeside? I think it was guys who are like miles off the radar that you can bring them in. I mean, there's like Chris Doolan's one of the best. In fact, certainly Chris Doolan's one of the best goal scorers all the time. Erskine, one of the most beloved players over the last like 20 years we've seen at Thistle. Will Luke Macbeth be up there? I don't know, but he could be. And Stanway as well. Stanway, the times I've seen, just reads the game very well. Good passer of the ball. And I think it'll be a big season for him. I think he got more games last season, and I think we'll see him more this year. I think him, Macbeth and Turner, when you look at those midfield parts, that's quite a tasty looking midfield.
I think, again, no, similar to Diak, like he might struggle for game time. Like maybe, but on what I would say is, if one of them's injured, there'd be no concerns whatsoever in terms of Stanway coming in and playing 4, 5, 6 games. Yeah. You're right, I think he's a talent. If everybody stays fit, I don't know if he'll get the amount of minutes that you would want him to get at that age.
The only thing that I've seen from Thistle where I do have slight concerns about is Lee Ashcroft, who has come in from Dundee to bolster the defence. Now, he was on loan at Raith Rovers last season. I think he made one appearance before a season-ending injury.
So he got injured in that game. First half, 43 minutes at Somerset Park.
Now, I watched the highlights of him playing against Clyde in the League Cup. I think that was quite a harrowing evening for him because he basically passed the ball into his own net from about 60 yards and then got completely done by Logan Dunnicky for Bullywee's second goal of the game. That might be a concern, like that you're waiting for him to get up to speed, because Lee Ashcroft in his day, I mean, there was calls at one point for him to replace Ryan Porteous in the Scotland squad.
I do think that's where they're a bit lacking. So I think they have 3 centre halves. So you're right. So in terms of Ashcroft, can he be the player that he was before that injury? If he is, fine. They've got an excellent championship centre half there. I think Aaron Muirhead isn't quite at that level, but again, he's fine. I think Daniel O'Reilly is probably roughly the same. He's absolutely fine. Either side of them waxed lyrical about Harry Milne. He's probably not quite the levels that he was at 2 years ago, but again, that's hardly in the world. They need a right back.
Yeah.
Like Wasiri Williams is ultimately filling in there.
And every time I hear the name Wassily Williams, I think of Wascally Wabbit. But only, like we mentioned when we talked about Airdrie right at the very start, see if they could get their hands on Caballo Megwa.
Yep.
That'd be some team.
If Hibs are willing to let Megwa go out and loan, I suspect they will, then so I believe one of the rumour I heard was that he may go out on loan, but it'll be right at the end of the window.
Right.
And that's put off some clubs who, because you said you want to have, maybe especially when it comes to a back four, you want them in place early in the summer. However, whatever club is willing to wait until maybe even September, I don't know. Is it September the loan window closes?
I think so, yeah.
So if they're willing to wait that wee bit longer, then Megwath may become available at that point. But it's quite a dangerous game to wait. Because what if he doesn't become available? What if David Gray decides, actually, he is going to be part of my first team squad? Suddenly you get to September and you're playing with the greatest will in the world. Wascally Wabbit right back.
I don't know why I find that is so funny. How do you think Chris Doolan's generally done as manager since he's taken charge of Thistle? I mean, I thought last season, I mean, since he's come in, since he replaced Ian McCall, I think he's done really good. Mm-hmm. And I see there's some criticism from Thistle fans, and maybe it's that they'll obviously know a lot better than me. But I just think that on the whole, given the difficulties had the players that went out last season, to repeat a third place, to rescue the situation from McCall, because the team looked in bother at that point, get them up the table, get them into the playoffs, and then do the same thing again. Finish actually one place higher this season than they did last time, and it feels like the guy's doing really well. What have you made of him?
I was going to say that he has done as well as you could expect, but actually that probably is a wee bit harsh. He's probably done better than you would expect. Bear in mind as well that they were a penalty shootout away from getting to the playoff final. Now, I think it would have been similar to Raith. I don't think they really would have laid a glove on Ross County, a team that was in Simon Murray and Jan Danda, for example.
Yeah,
they would have had no answer to that. But you're right. I think he is an inexperienced manager who has done very, very well. I think there is points maybe where you would question his substitutions at times, but like nothing glaring that has been a kind of black mark against his time so far. I've been very, very impressed by him.
There's also Partick Thistle will be starring in a feature-length documentary. Filming commenced in May, and it was going to follow the club over the course of the season. Big question, do you think it's going to be as good as Grasping the Thistle?
No, but have you seen some of the other films that director has made?
Oh, I've read them. I mean, he's an Academy Awarding producer or something like that.
Well, I mean, that is true, right. But he also was involved in... You're right, he was a producer rather than director, I think, but he was also involved in Movie 43.
Oh, fuck. Movie 43, that's one of the worst, that's one of the biggest pieces of shit I've ever seen in my entire life. That's a horrible film. I'm not even smiling anymore. That's a horrible film.
He has been involved in a lot of shit. And some good films, so who knows?
What are the good films he's been involved in?
The one he won the Oscar.
Green Book or something like that?
Yes, that's what I was going to say, one that won an Oscar, Green Book, you're right.
Movie 43, my God. For anyone that's not seen that, it's a series of vignettes starring at the time, some very high profile A-list actors. But the comedy is like lowest common denominator. It's staggering. Is it Hugh Jackman goes out on a date and he's got a pair of testicles on his chin, and that's the joke. Hugh Jackman's got testicles, and he goes down to smell some soup, and he gets like soup in the testicles and chin, and that's the thing. The whole joke is that he's got his testicles, and everyone is oblivious to them apart from the woman he's out with. Does he blow his nose? Does ejaculate come out his nose when he blows his nose? I think that might happen in it as well.
I really hope he's not asking like Brian Graham to do stuff like this. I can't imagine him being keen.
Aye, go on, Brian. That'd be hilarious. His prosthetic testicles.
I think this is like a good team to have a documentary about. Like they're neither good nor inept enough to be interesting. It can't be as bad or as dull as that Hearts documentary. I can't imagine it'll be that exciting.
No. You need, if there's one team in Scotland you want to make a documentary about this season, unfortunately we'll have to wait till we get into League One before we talk to them. You know exactly who we're discussing there, but we'll come to them in a couple of hours. God, I know we keep making the jokes about the length of this podcast, but we are really running away with ourselves here. Remember Grasping the Thistle? That was good.
And so I remember it. I don't know if I remember watching it.
Did we to watch it for an episode of View from the Terrace where we reviewed it? I'm not sure if that was one you might have missed. I think it was actually you were in your seat for that one.
No, I definitely haven't. Definitely didn't watch it.
We watched it. That was good. I mean, John Lambie just swore the entire time. The only time he was at peace when he was with his pigeons. That was the only time. Just so aggressive, so angry, other than when he was with his pigeons. Title challengers then, we're going for Thistle.
Yes, I second.
Second.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. Interesting. No, I presume the team that's going to finish in first place, we've not quite touched on them yet.
No, I have.
Or Livingston?
I already have.
Oh, right, okay. Well,
you haven't.
The team, because the team I think is going to win the league is Queen's Park. I'm kidding. It's Raith Rovers, but we'll get Queen's Park out the way. Now, Shaughan, if you want to go away and pour yourself a coffee while I give a wee run through what's going on at Queen's Park. I've done this for every team just to help you, the listener, put a bit of context about what's been happening over the summer. I've written a little potted history about each team, and like we anticipate that some teams are going to have good seasons, some teams are going to have moderate seasons, and some teams that will probably have bad seasons. And I think that takes us nicely into Queen's Park. Where to start with them? Last season felt like a failed experiment. You know, they were completely enthralled at one point to the director of football, Marion Bucher. He had assembled a squad that lacked experience and know-how, and under Robin Veldman, they looked both completely inhibited and completely overcoached. And they went on a horrendous streak of 15 games without a win. And then in January, former St Johnstone manager and Scottish Cup and League Cup double winner Callum Davidson came in, and they finished in 8th place on the final day of the season. Now, at one point, Shaughan, you and I did a Bog Standard Terrace podcast where we speculated that Queen's Park had finally put their silly days behind them and would become just a Bog Standard championship club. But that hasn't happened. And the manager is not the most senior member in the organisation. They've appointed a director of football called Darren O'Donnell. Now, he's a football agent working in the industry for about 18 months or so. He's got his own roster of players. Who's his uncle? Lord Willie Hoy, who's been Queen's Park's benefactor since 2019. Well, you really got to break Queen's Park into two things here, because we've got the stuff that's happened like on the pitch, and then we'll have to talk about the stuff that's going on off the pitch as well. So we'll start by looking at them on the pitch. Are you been impressed by Callum Davidson's transfer business?
So there was an interview with Callum Davidson, was it maybe about 2 weeks ago?
Was this on the club website?
Yeah, and it was that. And bear in mind, it's always going to be a positive interview if it's on the club website. And he was asked what he'd made of their summer transfer business, and he went, surprising.
Not the adjective you want your manager to use when he's talking about the club's transfer business.
And then you kind of felt like, I think Queen's Park fans felt that maybe they were just turning things around when they announced that they were signing Zach Rudden.
Yes.
Now, I thought he was poor on loan at Starts Park last season.
I think he's been quite good so far since he joined them.
I think that there is a case to be made that Raith didn't use him in terms of what his attributes are. I think if you just want Zach Rudden to run towards goal and we will give you the ball, that's fine. I think if you play up, I think if you surround him with colleagues, he could be fine. I think if you just lump the ball up to him as a lone striker, he is not going to be fine. Yeah. And that's often he found himself in that position at Starts Park. So I wouldn't write him off.
I wonder how that happened, given the quality that Raith would have had around him.
Because he was often coming on off the bench when they were maybe holding on to a lead.
Right. No, I get you.
But the problem is technically, I don't think he's a particularly good player. I don't think his first touch is very good. And in terms of reading a game, like you would play the ball long because you're under pressure. And if you have Jack Hamilton up front, then he would have the centre half behind him. They'd be trying to hold him off, and then he'd take control of the ball, hold it up, try and win a free kick or drag the team up. Zach Rudden would, and I mean every time, would be behind the centre half, and the centre half would be holding him off. So that isn't his game. So if that's what Callum Davidson wants him to do, it'll fail. But I mean, I was at the Queen's Park game yesterday, and he was okay. He led the line, but you had Dom Thomas near him. You had Roddy McGregor playing kind of just behind him. And as much as he hasn't been involved in the goals, which is slightly concerning because Queen's Park have scored goals, and Rudden hasn't scored very many of them, so that's just a concern. But I still wouldn't write him off based on a poor loan spell last time around. Yeah,
I mean, Rudden's game is more like stretch and play, dragging defenders out the way, and I think if you've got like guys, as you mentioned, like Dom Thomas in behind who can do a bit quite technical, the players that they've got already, I suppose, like Rudden caps a decent spine through the team. We've got guys like Callum Ferry. Callum Ferry's a very, very good goalkeeper. Really good. You know, Jack Thompson, I think he's a really good central midfielder. I know he gets used at the back, and I think that's more down to lack of options than anything else. But I really like the guy. I think he's got so much energy. He's a good passer, really, really enthusiastic. And then you've got Thomas, the captain, who plays out wide, and he's really, really good. I mean, we know what we're going to get from Dom Thomas. Very technical, somebody who's always wanting to get the ball into the box. But I think that for the players that they've brought in, I think they've perhaps lost more from the players that have gone out the way. And the biggest player that went out, and this is the player whose goals that Zach Rudden will be expected to replace, is Rory Payton, moved on to Port Vale for £150,000, a rumoured £150,000. He got 23 goals in 44 appearances last season, and that's for a team who spent a lot of the period down towards the bottom of the table. I don't think Zach Rudden will get as many goals as that. I think Zach Rudden will probably get a fraction of those goals.
Yeah, I agreed. And they are... Nobody else will... So those 23 goals, it's not as if they'll be absorbed by other players within that team. So therefore, you need to become more solid, I suppose, to make up for that. And I'm not seeing that at this moment in time. Partly because of injuries, I suppose. But that's still something you need to deal with. And as much as they might have a starting 11, where if everybody was fit, you would say, right, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay, but there's nothing on the bench.
Go beyond that. And the other guys, like Alex Bannon left, he went to join Burton Albion for £100,000. And I think ultimately that is, Alex Bannon is the kind of player that the club want to develop. Good young guys that come through the system and then can be sold on for profit. That was ultimately, I think that was the main aim of Queen's Park turning professional, was to make money off guys like Alex Bannon. They've done the same sort of thing with Callum McKenna back in February, but that just necessitates, I think, you're weakening the side by losing Bannon. You know, Danny Wilson unexpectedly left the club after the Hibs game in the League Cup. And then, right, if you want to go, I mean, that's one of the most recent departures, Killian Sheridan, who I thought they might have wanted to hold on to me.
It was excellent. Him and Peyton dovetailed each other very, very well.
Certainly proved us wrong, because I had...
It looks like very foolish.
I thought when Sheridan came in that he'd play like 3 games and just disappear again. Instead, he played several games and was excellent. and was very good.
Scored or set up a goal in almost all of them.
Him and Peyton doved well, and I just think that the players have gone in. Maybe Danny Wilson's the negligible one, because they've brought in Nikolai Uja from Inverness Caledonian Thistle, who's a bit younger, perhaps a bit more mobile, one of Cali's better players last season. In fact, defensively, Cali Thistle were really good last season. It was just like everything else.
And Joey Dunfermline came in, replaced a really good back four with another back four that was completely unnecessary.
Aye, so I just done well. So it feels as though the team's not better than it was last season, and I think it's perhaps lacking in the key areas. However, we mentioned goals might be a bit of a problem. Roddy McGregor looks really good since he's come in. You've seen him yesterday, the 6-0 win over Kelty Hearts. What do you make of him?
Very, very good. I mean, he can exploit any space that he's given, has an eye for goal, and is aware of players round about him.
You know who reminds me a wee bit of? Frank Lampard. Like, obviously, I'm talking like for the very,
like,
very
I'm
top.
laughing, but no, I understand it.
You know what I mean? Sort of making those late runs in there. And when you see how well he's done for Callum Davidson, you wonder what Duncan Ferguson was supposed to...
I wonder what Duncan Ferguson does just in general.
You wonder what Duncan Ferguson's thinking.
Roddy McGregor.
I know that he perhaps maybe had some fitness issues last season that prevented him from playing, but 5 goals in 4 appearances so far, and albeit, it's against Queen's Park of broadly their League Cup group stage there against Hibernian, where they were really showing up quite badly against them, but then against Peterhead, Kelty, Elgin City, sort of poorer part-time teams in the SPFL, they absolutely destroyed them. So ultimately you've got to take something from that. McGregor's looked really good in them, but it seems bizarre that you would let him go. There is
a I suppose a kind of positive and negative in terms of how the remainder of the transfer window, I suppose. So bear in mind they've in Willie Hockey they have somebody who has money, and in fairness I think it's maybe went on facilities rather than players in the past, but I think there is scope there because they've brought in transfer fees. There is scope there to bring more players in. The concern would be how, so the guy that they've put in charge of bringing in players, how good is he at doing it? So as much as there is probably still a budget there to bring in players, is he going to be any decent at bringing them in? I suppose we'll soon find out. But I think there is enough there in terms of a starting 11 for them to stay away from trouble if they can supplement it with another 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So I am not. I think they might be okay, but it's dependent on what happens between now and end of August.
I think that the guys you've got, I mean, Cammy Kerr was another one.
Yeah.
Talked about very, very solid. I think that Dundee have now perhaps outgrown him under Tony Docherty. Like, I think Cammy Kerr was a fine player when they were bobbing between the Premiership and the Championship. I think
I'm looking forward to seeing him in a Glasgow park practicing throw-ins with his girlfriend.
he seems like a very sweet boy. Cammy Kerr. And on top of that as well, one of the players that's come back, like Charlie Fox, so I don't think there's any indication as to when he's going to come back from his injury.
I think it's a really bad one. I think it might be an ACL.
Oh shit.
I think he's going to be out for a massive chunk of the season.
I will certainly talk, speaking of ACL injuries, one player that's going to be coming back from that, I'm not sure when, but Grant Savoury is going to be coming back, and prior to his injury, he looked absolutely cracking. Yeah, he looked really good. There's not talk of him actually leaving Queen's Park?
Leeds. I think Leeds were interested until he got the injury.
Well, hopefully he can come back and he's the same player, because he really was a fabulous young player. But it's the worry was, I think, because Queen's Park's transfer business was quite slow, and then when they saw that Darren O'Donnell had been appointed the director of football, I think the concern was it was all just going to be young boys who'd been released from academy clubs. And I think there might be the scope for them to do that, but as we always say, it has to be done. You can't just put young players in there and expect them to thrive. It needs to be, like, I think, 2 at a time. Like, you can bring a central midfielder and a fullback, and as long as you've got the experienced players around them to help them and guide them through the games, and be in that dressing room environment as well, that's helpful. You can't just put them all in once, and I think that's what Queen's Park did last season, and then ultimately got away with it. And it wasn't until they were able to supplement guys like Sean Welsh, Killian Sheridan coming in, Danny Wilson. Danny Wilson came in last season, didn't he? Aye.
It does feel like they've totally moved away from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe I was wrong with my introduction then. That's why I should have rewritten it before.
But at the start of last season, that absolutely was what they were going for. Mm-hmm. Flood your starting 11 with young players and get them minutes and then sell them on. Mm-hmm. But it very much feels like they've moved away from that since January. Like, very few of the players that are coming in are that kind of late teens, early 20s that they seem to be going for a year ago or whatever. And
on top of that as well, just there are some promising young players that are coming. You are right to point out the lack of depth, but guys like Zach Mockin, Liam McLeish, Josh Scott, I think we all contributed at points last season. I'm sure we spoke about them on podcasts. It's just about making sure the framework's in place to allow them to develop. Now, that's Queen's Park on the pitch. We'll get a quick prediction from you.
I'm trying to think where I got to. I've already said somebody will finish 10th.
Morton will finish 10th.
8th.
Who do you have 9th?
Did I have Hamilton as 9th? I had Hamilton as 9th.
Yeah, Hamilton's 9th.
Did I have Dunfermline as 8th?
I think so.
Right, so I need to say Queen's Park 7th.
Queen's Park in at 7. Right, now that's Queen's Park stuff like on the pitch. Let's try and talk about what's happening with them off the pitch, because they were supposed to be playing at Hampden this season. They would be playing at Lesser Hampden from the start of September, but then until the start of September, where Hampden was getting a new pitch relayed. But now, with the ongoing issues with the redevelopment of Ibrox, Rangers are going to be playing at the National Stadium for the foreseeable future, and Lord Haughey very kindly allowed them to use Hampden for as long as they need it. It could be October, but I think that's that's a very optimistic estimate. I think it could be actually into 2025.
I think so as well.
By the time that so it means that Queen's Park are likely to be spending the season at Lesser Hampden. I think this is ultimately what everyone wanted to see when Lesser Hampden was redeveloped. Unfortunately, Lesser Hampden hasn't been redeveloped to any decent standard. Now, you were there, Shaughan. We mentioned there you saw them 6-0 against Kelty. What is Lesser Hampden like as an experience?
Incomplete is how I'd probably describe it.
Okay.
I mean, so you essentially have the one stand, but it is, I'm trying to think how many rows it has. Maybe 8.
As many
10,
as that?
10 at the most,
right?
If that. But it's very low. Mm-hmm. So I was right in the middle. Didn't have a great view. You're very, very low. Maybe if you're right at the back, you have a slightly better view. But the fact that you have I laughed when I went to. I goes, I'll get a ticket for this game. I've never been. The fact that Queen's Park are going to be using this for short term at the very least. I'm now back down to only having done 41 rather than 42. Because I will get this stadium out of the way. Because I've got a ticket for the away end. Easy to do that because like maybe the home end's full. When that you can pick your seat. Mm-hmm. 86 seats in the away end. That was it. So you've got eight. Well, the away section, I suppose, rather than away end. Section 7, 86 seats. So kind of went right in the middle. Didn't think it was a great view, but the fact that you have this kind of weird royal box that's just far too big.
Directly across from you.
It seats maybe 40, and to be fair, it was full. But it kind of feels like there's maybe a club in League One, I think, as well, that almost feels like that they are set up to, in terms of what the club is kind of who they're serving first of all is the people, the board, and the people who are maybe buying hospitality.
Yeah, I think I know who the other
and
club is you're talking
everybody about. Else is not an afterthought, but they're second on the list. That's how Queen's Park feel at this moment in time. And almost all of Willie Hockey's decisions seem to benefit the SFA rather than Queen's Park. And the fact that they are now 5 years into this 10-year plan, I think that's initially Willie Hockey said, I'll be here 10 years. They're not homeless, but they have a home that isn't fit for purpose. If they only have a home support that is going to bring them in enough money that, so you've got 900 fans coming in every week, that's not going to be enough to
That's, when you said the 86, I was thinking, like, see, for instance, like there's teams in that division. I'm thinking Falkirk, for instance. If Falkirk are having a good season and they get away, they could fill it out just purely by away fans. You remember the game they played last season against Hamilton, where they completely sold out that stand behind the goals? They could easily do
Falkirk
that.
We're on to bring 1,500.
Yeah, they could do.
And the entire stadium holds 900. I mean, it's not really good enough. And the communication and this has always been a concern. The communication has been appalling. And like, in terms of I think there was a point where they put season tickets on sale, and it might be like an early bird option. Then everything went quiet, and it was probably because at that point,
well, they were getting all the tweets out for Pink playing at Hampden. That's why they needed time for that.
But the problem is as well that, like, you're probably going to have a situation where some of their home games that you presume there's going to be, all the home games are going to be Saturday at 3 o'clock. Probably a lot of them are now going to be moved to a Friday evening.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't it ideal if you've already bought a ticket?
Was it Livingston or something? I think they're the first team that are playing Queen's Park, and that's
already been moved.
That's already moved, and they were quite arsey about it in their statement online.
There might not be that many games get moved because it'll need to be literally the same weekend where Rangers have a home game at Saturday at 3 o'clock that coincides with Queen's Park's fixture list having a home game at 3 o'clock, and Rangers will play a lot of games on a Sunday, so there might not be that many games that get moved, so it might not be that big a deal. But still, regardless, the fact that you are second option at what should have been your home stadium, it's just a really shit state of affairs.
I would be thoroughly disappointed. I think that they're fortunate in a way that they have done well in this League Cup group stage. They lost to Hibs, but they performed very well against like mediocre opposition, and that does, you would think, augur well. You can only beat what's in front of you, and that would go well. But it's just the stuff off the pitch as well. It's just, here we are. You're right in what you say. Here we are, 2019. Queen's Park turned professional, and we're still no further forward as to knowing exactly what the club is and what it's for, and how it just boggles your mind that you think all this money has been spent and this is what we've got. It's like the episode of The Simpsons where Ned Flanders' house gets destroyed by the hurricane and it gets like rebuilt. That's kind of what Leicester looks like. There's like a room full of electricity. I don't know. I mean, I've been in the Royal Box at Leicester. I was doing something for the Scottish Cup, and it was to mark the 150th anniversary of the first Scottish Cup final. So it was Queen's Park with the team, because obviously they won it. And it's a really, really nice setup. It's really, really nice. But how many people are actually going to get the chance to experience that?
And I think from the outside looking in, if you didn't know too much about Queen's Park, you say, well, what are you moaning about? You've went from being a team an amateur side in the bottom tier of Scottish football that were probably eventually would disappear out of the SPFL unless changes were made. And now changes have been made. And now you are potentially going to, you might be mid-table, you might challenge for top 4 in the Championship. You had a spell where if you'd beaten Dundee in the last day of the season and 2 seasons ago, you would have been in the top flight. What are you moaning about? But if I was a Queen's Park fan, I'd be struggling to enjoy what's in front of me, or even 2 seasons ago, because I really don't know what's coming in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that Lesser Hampden needs redeveloped again. You know, when you look at like teams, and when you look at like teams with single stand stadiums, Look at Oakville View, for instance. Like Oakville View is a good place to go and watch football. It's got one stand, but it's steep.
Yep.
So if you go and sit, like even you go and sit up at like 2 or 3 rows in, you can get a really good view of what's going on and get. But like, see, it just looks like a sort of fancier Meadowbank, and that's something
that's exactly what I was going to say. It's basically like exactly a fancier Meadowbank. What I did enjoy yesterday was when I turned up to kind of scan my QR code, and the steward went, "Are you here for the football?" I was like, well, what's my other options? Like, what else is on right now? But no, I was indeed there for the football.
And some old boy was very cheeky to you as well.
That was in the Queen's Park Cafe beforehand.
Right.
There was about a group of kind of 4 old guys. One of them...
The Queen's Park Cafe, so not next to the ground, but just the other side of Queen's Park. Yeah, I know where you are.
And a kind of boy shouted across, he goes, you on the telly on a Friday night, you on a view for the telly? I goes, aye, that's right. And then, like, one of his pals was like, he goes, I've watched that a few times. He goes, I think all you talk a load of fucking crap.
Right, okay. Well, I don't know what you say to that. How old was this guy?
He was maybe 65.
I mean, there's not much you can say to when somebody says that. I remember meeting a guy in a pub and he said he didn't like it. And first time it was actually somebody had said to my face he don't like it. And I don't know how do you react to that? Like you know the guy in The Big Lebowski where Buddy Lebowski goes like, "I'll suck your cock for like $100." You're like, is that how I'm supposed to react when someone says that?
I think it's like, I just kind of laughed and then went, well, enjoy your afternoon. And then I was like, that feels quite rude. Like, it's just like, if I bumped into a presenter of the One Show.
Yeah, Jermaine Genus.
If I went into Jermaine Genus, I don't think I would say to him, by the way, I think the One Show's a load of pish.
Aye, I wouldn't say anything.
I just wouldn't say anything. I might say hello, I don't even think I would.
If I got into a lift with Jermaine Genus, I hope this lift does not break, because I do not want to be stuck here with Jermaine Genus.
I certainly wouldn't criticise his body of work.
Aye, no, maybe there's me criticising. Just because that I wouldn't want to get stuck in a lift with Jermaine Genus doesn't mean I'm criticising his body of work.
Yeah, in a roundabout kind of way.
Yeah, aye. Well, like
almost directly, actually.
I suppose I just be pressed up against the doors, trying to pry them open. Aye, so Queen's Park, lower mid-table.
Yes. Safe fish.
I'm going for 9th.
Okay.
I'm going for 9th. I do think they need reinforcements, and I just think that the people, I do feel sorry for the fans. I think it's going to be a miserable experience this season. Lack of communication, stadium not fit for purpose. At least the pitch is nice, so we'll get to see some good football in it.
Although lots of players get injured on it.
Right.
So Lyndon Dykes in the summer.
That's right.
I think Will Tizard and Charlie Fox have both got injured on it.
Really?
So Charlie Fox picked up his injury in the friendly against Celtic, and I'm fairly certain that Tizard picked up his injury in the prior home game in the League Cup, I think.
I just imagine like Lesser Hampden's been built on the burial ground of some like old Scottish football players or something like that. Like there's a Stephen King novel if it was based in the south side of Glasgow.
They did kind of demolish that that kind of old hut that everybody was raised in. So I feel like there's some kind of hex on them. I feel that's what the Royal Box is built on.
That's it. And until it's like rebuilt using the old materials, the curse will never be excised. Shaughan, we've been speaking for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and we're about to finish up the championship.
I can see Fowler's mop of hair, and he's shaking his head.
Aye, for just full disclosure, we are recording this in Craig Fowler's living room, and Craig Fowler's just sitting across from us making faces. This is the only time we're going to reference Craig Fowler during this podcast, because it's nothing to do with him, really. Shaughan, Raith Rovers.
Yes.
Let us wrap up the championship by discussing your boys. I think last season, excellent season for Raith Rovers in the whole. You know, given the fact that you'd finished 7th with nothing to play for, no fun last season, and you senior management teamed up. There was greater investment in the club, both in its infrastructure and on the playing squad. And Ian Murray's team were able to mount a title challenge. And for about 7/8 of the season, you were pushing Dundee United all the way, but just fell down in that final stretch and finished in 2nd. If only we weren't so shite against Arbroath.
Yeah.
And you got to the playoff finals against Ross County, but you were shown up by a far better calibre of opposition. Now, this is really, you'll be doing most of the talking here, because my impressions, Raith Rovers have signed well, strengthened in areas that struggled in the last season, brought in some good experienced players, and they are a striker away from having the best equipped team to win the division.
Potentially, but I'm not quite so sure. So right. So you're right in terms of the players that they brought in. I think they've signed well at the back, and there was very much a valid argument that they needed to strengthen that back line. However, the only team that kept more clean sheets than them last season was Dundee United. Only Dundee United and Inverness conceded fewer goals. So it's not as if it was a terrible defence, but it very much has been upgraded. Paul Hanlon, albeit he hasn't played any minutes in the League Cup, which is slightly concerning.
Why is that?
No idea. Before the League Cup, Ian Murray said he was suffering from tightness. I don't know what that means. But he hasn't played at all in the League Cup group stages, so that's concerning.
Remember when you were younger and somebody called you tight, and that was like the worst insult anyone could ever give you?
Lewis Stevenson, I mean, like that. I mean, he has been very, very good in the League Cup group stages, and him and Dylan Easton down the left hand side have formed a really good partnership. So that's been good to see.
Callum Fordyce has come in as well.
Fordyce, not just a kind of meat and potato centre half, somebody who is wanting to play football as well. So it feels like he is somebody who fits in well with what Ian Murray wants to do. The only thing he hasn't fixed is, certainly for the probably last third of the season, yes, they were keeping clean sheets and winning and conceding too many goals, but it's played down to that style of play. Like they were a bit more, I don't know. Certainly weren't as free flowing as in that early part of the season.
Yeah, they did look a bit stodgy and a bit unimaginative.
And they struggled to open teams up. And I don't think that's been rectified at all. In terms of the forward areas, I think Lewis Gibson is an interesting signing, and he's looked pretty bright in terms of the opportunities that he's had. Probably hasn't had enough opportunities in the League Cup so far, but he is a decent prospect, I think, and I'm looking forward to seeing him the rest of the campaign. But that's it. Like, they were very much reliant on the fullbacks for width last season. Liam Dick done it, but wasn't that keen on it, and wasn't that great at it. Ross Millen was keen, but he had a fallout, and then everybody they've brought in since at that right back position doesn't seem particularly adept at it.
Kieran Freeman's coming from Ireland.
I haven't been overly impressed by him so far. He's probably an okay. It's weird because he's probably okay defensively. Might have been at fault for the Ross County second goal, but maybe I'm being a wee bit harsh. And he does want to get forward, certainly more so than James Brown, who would never get over the halfway line. Freeman will bomb on, but only until he receives the ball. So he is an option. So I suppose somebody has to go to him as an opponent. But when he receives possession, he doesn't want to beat a man. He doesn't want to get to the byline. He doesn't deliver a cross into the box from deep. He really wants to either go inside, so suddenly you're going into traffic, or he wants to pass it back to the centre half. So you're kind of starting from scratch again. So there isn't really the same as it was for ever since Ross Millen left the club, they don't really have that wide option on the right. So that hasn't really been solved. And in terms of strikers, even last season, we know that Ian Murray wants to add to that forward line because he ultimately brought in Zach Rudden. So you had Vaughan and Jack Hamilton and Zach Rudden.
Callum Smith, no including that.
Callum Smith, I suppose it feels like he is filling in as an auxiliary forward, right. And I think he's done okay. And I do think he's a decent finisher. But ultimately last season he started the season pretty well, then kind of disappeared, then became an option off the bench, and something like his pace was a decent option when you are needing something in the kind of latter stages of a game. But I don't think he is the solution to what they're requiring up top. So I don't think that they have what their failings were for the last third of last season, which was to open up teams and get behind them and create opportunities. Never mind the finishing, just create those opportunities that need finished. I don't think they've solved that at all.
Because on paper, like Raith Rovers should have some of the most creative players in the division. You've got like Dylan Easton, who, particularly at the high points of that season, like when he scored the goal at Tannadice to beat Dundee United 1-0, that was amazing. That was his last
good, but that was his last good game.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. That his form really fell off. You get Josh Mullen, who on his day is very good, but always, I think his highs and ceilings can fluctuate between them. And I think that the midfield, there's a really good mixture in the midfield, but it's more. You're going to get more control than creativity, I think, between like Sam Stanton, Scott Brown, Sean Byrne. They'll allow you to dominate games, but you really need someone who's a little bit cleverer to open things up.
Everything for the last third of last season, everything was fairly slow and fairly ponderous, and the League Cup section was exactly the same. They were okay against Stirling Albion, no better than that. Like 3-0, you're not going to complain about that. Didn't really create too many other opportunities. Derek Gaston maybe had one save, and that was it, like one good save. I thought against Stranraer they were poor. I thought against Ross County they matched them for long spells of the game, but this is a Ross County team that's nowhere near as good as that one they faced in the playoffs. And although I wasn't at the game against Hamilton at the weekend, again watching the highlights back, it was pretty laborious stuff. And I know again you don't want to read too much into the League Cup, but I think there are, in that final third, there is things that they need to solve, and they haven't done so yet. And also another thing is that there's a number of teams, Queen's Park are a good example, where you finish second and you don't kick on, you regress. And I don't think Rovers are going to regress that much. I don't think they're going to struggle by any stretch of imagination. But I think last season, I think they will have less impact on a title challenge this season than they did last season, even though it was Dundee United, and even though there's it feels like everybody's a wee bit tighter this season in terms of abilities. I don't see Raith featuring in the title challenge.
You might be right there, because if you think criticism is not the right word, but the thing about Raith Rovers last season, a lot of it was moments where they would go through games not necessarily playing well, but through some reason they could score a last minute
winner.
If you remember, like one of the high points of the whole last season, Scott Brown's goal against Dundee United, like it's absolutely ridiculous looping volley from like 30 yards. That you can't do that every week. And when you begin to stop creating chances, then you do get a bit concerned from it, and then ultimately that's what happened. Those moments start happening, and there was nothing to fall back on.
You could almost compare it to the last time they were at the top end of the championship, which would have been John McGlynn's last season.
Right.
So remember, they started really well. Come about Christmas, they beat Kilmarnock at Starks Park 1-0, and they're maybe a point behind Kilmarnock going into the kind of Christmas and New Year. But if you remember, so many of those wins were based on the fact that Dario Zanata could not stop scoring for 25 yards.
I remember that, yeah.
You're like, right, well, this is a tactic and a game plan that is not sustainable. You need to find out another way to win games of football, because Zanata isn't going to do that every week. And last season was the same. Like, you can't win games of football in the 90th minute every single week. And they never really devised another way of winning games. It was just a kind of Murray ball tactic of just chaos.
Yeah.
And it worked to start with. And what you had after that, when it stopped working, was you had a competent championship team that was slightly better than most other teams, but not by a huge margin. And I still think they're in the same boat.
Is it just a case then of signing another striker, maybe getting a number 10 in?
Potentially, but they're not creating chances. So it almost feels like that Murray needs...
if a number 10 came in, though, that would allow you to somebody who could come and create chances, somebody who could support Easton and Mulligan.
The problem is, though, it feels like they already have a number of... it feels like they already have a load of number 10s. So whether it's somebody who can score goals, whether it's somebody who gives them an option out wide, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if Ian Murray knows. I suspect that...
It's not great if Ian Murray doesn't know.
I suspect that Stevie May will come in. Whether that helps matters, I don't know. I have never been more certain about anything over the summer than I think Stevie May will come in.
See if this was 15 years ago. No, it's not even 15 years ago. Yeah, if it was about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, that would be an absolutely amazing signing. But since, I always got the impression Stevie May, and there'll be people involved with the terrace that know a lot better than me, but ever since those injuries at Preston, he's just never really been the same player.
He has scored, I think it's 37 league goals in 10 years.
Right, that's an average of 3.7 a season.
That's not a lot. and to be fair, he's never dropped to championship level. So it might be that he would go to, might not be Raith Rovers, it might be Dunfermline, for example, would probably be interested in him. I think
he's never dropped to championship level, but I have seen him eat a kiwi whole.
Was it a kiwi? You're right, it was a kiwi that didn't peel off the skin.
Yeah, he just ate
ludicrous.
Ate it whole. Yeah.
Not the type of person I want in Kirkcaldy.
You mentioned Lewis Gibson, and I thought on paper that seemed like a really smart signing. It felt as though that he needed to leave Queen of the South, and I thought Raith Rovers would give him a really good opportunity to go and showcase his talents one level up. You said that he hasn't played very much.
That's probably unfair. I just expected him to play more, especially against Hamilton, because they were kind of down to the bare bones, and I thought, great opportunity to give Gibson a 90 minutes or his first start. But it was Kai Montague.
Oh yeah, the boy that's come from East Kilbride.
And to be fair, he's a kind of fits and starts I was quite impressed by. He started the game reasonably well, but then kind of fell out of it, and the game kind of changed when Lewis Gibson came on. So I think Lewis Gibson is a good sign-in, but in terms of how they start games, I don't really know how he fits in with the kind of formation that Murray wants to play. Again, something that Murray needs to think about in terms of a plan B, or even maybe just a better plan A.
Okay, I'm perhaps going to downgrade my chances for Raith Rovers after hearing that. Yeah, I suppose, it's effectively you've reconfigured the defence. You've upgraded the defence in 3 of the 4 positions, but other than that, the team's effectively the same.
There is an argument that because the defence is considerably, or in theory, considerably better if everybody's available, then the rest of the team doesn't need to sit as deep. The rest of the team doesn't need to protect the back 4 as much because you just have a better back 4. That should then allow the attacking players to just concern themselves with getting forward.
Okay.
I don't think it's quite as easy as that. And I think there's definitely a tendency to play Scott Brown and Shaughan Byrne in front of the back 4. I think that kind of slows things down. Whether there's an alternative, maybe play Stanton instead of one of them, I don't know.
One of the things I thought when Stevenson came in, I actually thought he'd be playing in central midfield. You know, he'd done it, he played there with Hibernian before.
And you thought they could because they've retained Liam Dick, so it's an option. But certainly every game so far he has played on the left, but got forward like really, really well, and had a number of assists already. So that augurs well. It's probably just the other side in terms of Freeman. I'm not seeing anything like that from him.
In terms of like Stevenson and Hanlon, because I think we've actually kind of glossed over that wee bit, just like how great these players have been. And obviously it feels like culturally for Hibernian, they feel like a huge loss for these guys that have been there and experienced so much with the club. And you can maybe make the joke that says they set the standard for Hibs and say, what's the standard of losing every week? You know, that's you could if you were being cruel, you would make that joke.
Glass half empty.
Very glass half empty. But I think that having had the opportunity to meet both of them, they are lovely guys who take their football really, really seriously and seem to great guys to have around the place, and it just feels like that Raith Rovers, there seems to be, just my perception of it when you add those two into mix, just a lot of strong characters.
Yeah, a number of players who have already won that league.
Yeah,
and I think the fact that like every summer Raith seemed to be linked with Stevenson, or maybe the last
felt like a matter of time.
So. Yeah, felt like a matter of time, unless he wanted to just retire, I suppose. But the fact that he's local as well, it kind of has that link. A great signing. Was
there not something that he said on a View from the Terrace where he was talking about being worried about dropping down a level because he thought that if he's playing in the top level of Scotland, where you get that degree of coaching, that degree of instruction, that makes him good. But then when you drop down, he worries that he might not necessarily be as good a player without that. Do you know what I mean? I think I've probably worded that quite badly.
No, I think I asked him, and I don't remember filming it at the time. I think I might have been after.
Oh Christ! So I've given off. This is some behind the scenes BTS secrets.
I'd say to him, "Do you think you would ever maybe move to a Raith Rovers or a Dunfermline when you leave Hibs?" And he was like, "The only thing that concerns me is exactly as you've described." And his big concern was he felt that lower leagues is more running. He goes, by the time I come to leave Hibs,
no, that's a fair point.
I probably didn't have 90 minutes of running in my legs. He goes, so that would concern me. But he's been excellent so far.
Good. Pleased to hear it though. So Raith Rovers, where are we going?
Fourth or fifth.
Wow, as low as that?
Yeah. I don't see them challenging for the league. And there's just so many teams in the Championship that have either incrementally improved or remained the same. So I think United are better. I think Livy will be good. Partick will be good again. I thought the Airdrie might fall away. They haven't, so I think it'll be a far bigger battle for Raith to get in the top 4. I don't see them challenging for the title.
Okay, so let's wrap up the Championship then, Shaughan. Who's winning it?
Livingston.
3 playoff places.
I can't remember who I went for. Must be Ayr United, Airdrie, and Partick Thistle.
9th place.
Hamilton.
And relegation.
Morton.
I think I'm going to completely change. I think the winner is going to be Partick Thistle.
Okay.
I'll go for the top 4 of Ayr United, Livingston and Falkirk. 9th place, I think it's going to be Queen's Park, and relegated is going to be Greenock Morton.
Right, okay, so some agreement there.
I wish I'd written it down because I've completely forgotten what I've completely forgotten what you said. I've completely forgotten what I've just said.
We won't be allowed to forget by people that listen. If they're still listening, it started a long time ago.
Aye, that Airdrie fan's completely checked out. Oh, they pronounced Murray Johnson's name wrong. That's it. Not listening.
I thought I had a T in it.